No emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
Hi there, welcome to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. In this show, we discuss Atari's last entry into the home video game market and its library, one game at a time. I am Shinto, Federation Reconnaissance Officer, and according to my stack of notes here, I should probably fill you in on your upcoming covert missions against the evil Tarakian pirates in part number J9009, Hover Strike. Hover Strike is a 2MB cartridge, a mission-based, futuristic vehicular combat simulator for 1 or 2 cooperative players developed by Atari and released around April of 1995. But before we get to April, let's back up to June 3rd, 1993. Atari announced the test launch of the Jaguar in the New York market. Among Jaguar games announced at that time, Cybermorph, Alien vs. Predator, Checkered Flag, or Jaguar Formula 1 Racing, or Redline Racing, or Checkered Flag 2, or whatever it was called at the time, Tempest 2000, and Battlezone 2000. Battlezone was a popular, one might say iconic, vector game released by Atari in 1980. For more on that game, I'm going to point you to a fairly recent episode of the Pie Factory podcast, episode 68. But just briefly, Battlezone puts you in control of a tank, able to move and fire at enemy tanks and flying saucers. You have a first-person perspective moving across a flat plain with mountains on the horizon, and there are geometric objects on the ground that can be used for cover against incoming enemy fire. You also have a radar scanner giving you an indication of where enemies are on an overhead perspective, except for the UFOs, they don't show up on radar. There was an Atari 2600 version of Battlezone. This was covered by Ferg in episode 126 of the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast, link in the show notes, and ports to some computer platforms for which I can find no podcast links. An updated version of Battlezone called Battlezone 2000 was developed by Handmade Software for the Atari Lynx. This was first shown off at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, January 1992. The game, however, wasn't actually released until October 1995, and was one of the very last Lynx games Atari would release. There's more to that Lynx game than initially meets the eye, but that's a story for a whole other podcast, perhaps the Atari Lynx Handycast, though sometime down the road. So yeah, Battlezone, big property for Atari, and I could see how one might think that an update of that classic game would work well on the next generation Jaguar console. In the August 1994 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, a 2-page Atari Jaguar ad entitled Let the Games Begin shows Battlezone 2000 among the titles, but instead of a screenshot, it only shows a picture of the logo, the same logo used in the Battlezone 2000 Lynx game. That same issue of EGM also has a Summer CES review, including Battlezone, just called Battlezone, no 2000, but it does have a real screenshot of the game. Indeed, on the Jaguar kiosk in the 1994 Summer Consumer Electronics Show, the label did simply say Battlezone is the title of the game. Not that I was there personally, but Biff was, and I'll include a link to Biff's gaming videos showing footage of this early version of the game. There didn't appear to be any enemies on screen, but you could see the cockpit view driving across a texture-mapped terrain, shooting at nothing in particular. It's possible the enemies were already destroyed, but the objective not yet completed, or just that the game didn't seem to have that functionality yet. The cockpit view is entirely different and seems to be non-functional, but the frame rate is pretty smooth, driving over largely flat texture-mapped surfaces and up and down some shallow valleys. The first reference I see to the name Hover Strike came from a Genie Roundtable discussion on November 30th of 1994, so the name change occurred somewhere between June and November of 1994. The rumor is that the game had diverged so much from its Battlezone roots that it warranted a different name, but I could find no source for that rumor. The game was developed by a team of developers including Dennis Fung, Craig Suko, Kerry Gee, and Eric Smith. The name Eric Smith may sound familiar to devotees of Atari's ST line of computers because he's the dude that wrote the multitasking kernel which works as an alternative to Atari's own in-house TOS, or TOS. Mint, which is a recursive acronym originally meaning Mint is not TOS, one of the many recursive acronyms out there in the open source world which say what the program isn't. GNU's not Unix, Wine is not an emulator, Nagios ain't gonna insist on sainthood being the successor to NetSaint. I'm sure that there are many more, but those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So Eric worked on Mint independently at first, but it gained some popularity when released into the community, including catching the eye of Atari engineer Alan Pratt. Atari wanted multitasking in TOS, which they were calling, wait for it, Multitos, and Alan thought Mint would make a good kernel. This was coming along, but in 1992, Alan left Atari, and Eric was brought in to help complete the project in November of that year. Multitos shipped with the Falcon 30 computer, but as you may know, that was it for Atari's computer line, since they changed focus to the Jaguar. Eric Smith worked on a couple games for the Jaguar, contributing to Club Drive and this game, Hover Strike. Craig Suko was a longtime Atarian who joined the company in 1984 and was part of the effort to port GEM, the graphical user interface, to the ST computer. He moved on to more of a managerial role at the company, working on the operating system for the ST computers, and after some work on the Jaguar itself, helped develop Hover Strike. He went on to Electronic Arts after leaving Atari in 1996, and then out of the games industry. Dennis Fung, after Atari, went on to co-found Page 44 Studios, a video game developer who worked with many big-name publishers before being acquired by Zynga in 2011. Also lending a hand on Hover Strike were a few names that I've mentioned before: Rob Zadibel, legendary Atari engineer, Lance J. Lewis, who sadly passed away January 18th of this year, and Tal Funkabilu. These are just a few of the many people who worked on this game. For the record, Lance Lewis said that it was, quote, a good bunch of guys on that team. A press release dated January 6, 1995 listed Hover Strike among titles expected for release in the first half of 1995. The release calls Hover Strike, quote, an action-packed, fully texture-mapped, first-person perspective 3D battle, end quote. According to the information I have, of all of the games expected to ship in the first half of the year, Hover Strike was the only one to actually hit that window, shipping in or around April. A follow-up to Hover Strike was released for the Jaguar CD entitled Hover Strike Unconquered Lands, which is not a sequel but contains several enhancements to the original game. I won't talk about those now, though. I've decided to save all that for episode 43. You are a presumably talented Federation pilot. As you may know, the Federation has established a colony on the distant planet of, Hey, Bishop? What's this planet in Hover Strike named? I don't seem to have that in my notes.
There is no name on record.
Really? Okay, well, good. Then I can stake my claim and give it a name myself. What should we call it? LV-426?
Taken.
Shintopia?
Too pretentious.
Cow Planet?
No cows.
Oh, I know. We'll call it Lance Luia, after the late Lance Lewis, who worked on this game, among many others, at Atari.
No objection.
Okay, so a Federation outpost on the remote planet of Lance Luia has gone dark. There has been no communication with the colony in over 6 months, and folks back home are starting to freak out, so the Federation sent out a scouting mission to investigate, only to discover that the Terrakian pirates have overrun this planet. They're machines of war roaming the entire surface. Worse yet, the Federation can't send their armada in to wipe out these pirates because of a set of powerful atmospheric laser cannons which make invasion plans impossible. However, Terrakian defenses are designed around a direct, large-scale assault. A small one-man fighter should be able to penetrate the outer defense. The Terrakians apparently don't consider a small one-man fighter to be of any threat, or they'd have a tighter defense. An analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia has demonstrated a weakness in their—
Stop quoting Star Wars. You sound like a nerd.
Yeah, I am what I am, but alright. By slipping one of our heavily armed hovercraft through the planetary defenses, the Federation hopes to wreak havoc on the surface, taking out strategic targets and thus allowing the Armada's approach. Preliminary reconnaissance has given you a list of potential targets, but there's more here going on Lance Luia, and it's kinda grisly. Terrakians have been known to process humans to extract certain organic compounds. You are to shut down this factory, stop the production of Terrakian Soylent Green or whatever, and therefore save all the humans you can. Good luck, and no pressure, but you're our only hope. It's all up to you. Lives are on the line, and the entire Federation is watching. Hover Strike is a mission-based game where you visit various locales across the planet to complete various objectives, all the while fending off attacking enemies. You are in the cockpit of an armored hovercraft.
This is a highly sophisticated doowacky. If you don't use it responsibly, kablamo!
Using anti-gravity to float above whatever terrain you might encounter, rock, sand, water, even lava. There are 6+ different environments in this game, but I'll get into those later. Given the lack of kinetic friction, when you hit the gas pedal in your hovercraft, holding it down if you want to build up speed and then let off, you will continue moving in that direction until slowed down by wind resistance, gravity, enemies, or terrain. You do not stop or turn on a dime. This is important to know. Your only controls are moving in the direction you're currently facing, changing which direction you're facing, and hitting the brakes, which can bring you to a complete stop if held down. Usually. You may find your hovercraft hopping, kind of skipping a bit as you build up speed. It's not a terribly smooth ride, and since the locales you'll be visiting on this planet aren't all flat, you won't be moving across the surface like the puck on an air hockey table, sadly enough. It's not that easy. There are ridges, hills, valleys, craters, stuff like that. Newtonian physics still applies, dang it. Depending on your momentum, you may slide up a shallow slope, come to a stop, and start sliding back down. Cruising along in a straight line with a ridge off to the left may cause your direction to shift to the right, depending on speed and angle. Just because it's good physics doesn't mean that it won't disorient you, so be aware. Also, enemy fire can knock you back, or forward, or opposite whatever direction they're shooting you. There is one time where conservation of momentum doesn't seem to apply, and that's when you're turning in place. You can spin 360 degrees in as little as 1 second if you hold down left or right on the D-pad long enough, and then you'll come to a stop instantly when you let go. It's not like just the turret is spinning either. You don't have a separate turret like a tank. The hovercraft is all one rigid vehicle. In addition to moving forward, there is a way to put your hovercraft into reverse, but I'll get into that later. Running into steep walls at speed or falling into deep valleys can cause damage. And you can only take a certain amount of damage from these environmental hazards and from enemy fire before your craft is destroyed. You start the game with 2 more hovercraft in reserve. The Federation thought ahead and brought a couple spares, so if you lose one, you have to start the mission over with another. I swear one time, though, I had a replacement hovercraft dropped in place and didn't have to restart the level. But other times I tested this, I did indeed start over, but with the same number of weapons I had started with before. It's not documented anywhere, but every 50,000 points you get an extra hovercraft. That's a strange sound for an extra hovercraft to make. You can technically have up to 9 hovercraft in reserve, but man, if you can put up 350,000 points on this game without losing a ship, then my hat's off to you. You have weapons, very helpful for blowing up bad guys. If you're going in solo, then you'll find that you can aim your weapons up and down, but need to rotate your entire hovercraft in order to aim left and right. If you are teaming up with another human, that person will be the gunner and will have full control over weapons aiming, largely independent of the hovercraft itself. There's your standard photon cannon, which is capable of rapid fire, but only by tapping the trigger. This is your basic weapon. It's always there, readily available. It does use some of your hovercraft's energy, but not a lot. You can fire off in excess of 500 photon shots with a full tank of gas. Or energy, whatever. Your photon cannon lacks in power what it makes up in availability. Most, if not all, enemies will require more than 1 photon shot to destroy. Hear that? That means you need to keep on firing. Moving on to your alternate weapon systems, there are missiles. They fly straight out like your photon blasts, but are much more powerful, about 5 times the destructive potential of your photon cannon shot for shot. But better than missiles are guided missiles. With these, you can establish a target lock.
Target locked.
And missiles that are fired will track that object, within reason, of course. The guided missiles do try, but if the target is on the other side of a ridge, the missile may not be able to fly with enough of a curve to reach it. There are no sharp 90-degree turns here, but depending on how you set up your shot, a guided missile can fly around an obstruction to strike an enemy concealed behind it. And it's very satisfying. It's nice to see these work their magic, especially when you're on the move. You could probably fire and forget with this weapon, but it's kind of more fun to keep an eye on it and watch your target explode off in the distance. Adding smarts to the missiles does not take away from their ordnance payload, so guided missiles are just as strong as regular missiles. And without a target lock, they behave just like regular missiles, but that's kind of a waste. Your hovercraft comes stocked with one other type of explodey thing.
Mortars.
That's right, mortars. Think of them as grenades, but grenades that are triggered not by a timed fuse, but rather ground contact. Only ground contact. Launching a mortar will hurl it up in the air in the direction of your gun sight. You can adjust the distance that mortars will travel by positioning the gun sight, up for more range, down for closer range. These do cause what's called splash damage, meaning they can damage nearby enemies, but could also technically damage yourself, though I can't say that's actually happened to me playing this game. Also worth mentioning is that mortars are useless against airborne enemies. If they aren't made out of ground, then the mortar won't explode on contact. For certain missions, your hovercraft may be equipped with one more weapon, but it's not really a weapon.
Flares.
They look and behave a lot like mortars, but start flashing brightly as they approach the ground, lighting up the area around them. The planet of Lanceluia is not bathed in sunlight. Its host star must be very small or distant, perhaps a red dwarf. It's a very common type of star in our galaxy, but not very luminous. They have a low absolute magnitude. So as dark as most of the missions are, some of these missions take place at night, and that's even darker. The flares can show you the path forward, so you don't drive off a cliff or into the side of a mountain or something. Actually, you have an unlimited number of flares. Not sure how that works technically, but don't worry about that. Just try lobbing several flares at a time, especially in a low horizontal arc for best results. In a pinch, though, they don't call it a photon cannon because it sounds cool. Well, not only because it sounds cool, at least, but the projectiles do give off light as they travel along, and though not as bright as flares, I still found them to be illuminating, both in terms of casting light as well as dispelling obscurity. No, that's not a pun. The missiles and mortars do have a maximum quantity that you can store at one time, and that number is 64 each. My son instantly made a connection to Minecraft, 64 being the maximum number of some types of blocks that you can carry in one inventory spot. But Hoverstrike did it first. When selected, one of the displays on your dashboard will show you the absolute number for that weapon, in addition to a bar graph showing the ammunition levels for all 3 weapons up to 16. It seems to be slightly color-coded when you get really low, turning from green to yellow. So this little bar graph is good for a quick visual indication of when you're just about to run out of a particular weapon. Another display on your instrument console shows a picture of the currently selected weapon. The targeting system is one of the best features of your hovercraft. Even if you're not using guided missiles, you should still make use of your targeting system.
Target.
You can select the closest object as well as cycle through any objects on your radar screen, also a great feature that fortunately came standard on your hovercraft.
Target. Target.
Locking onto the target does 2 things. It overlays a targeting reticle over wherever this object is on screen. The reticle looks like 4 triangles pointing toward the center. If you are familiar with the GEM UI on Atari ST computers, it looks just like the close button window. So it does this, and also the targeting computer displays, if not the exact object, then a diagram of the type of object behind the lock. Not every type of enemy vehicle, weapon system, or piece of infrastructure has its own icon, but most of them do. Aside from enemy stuff, there are also pickups for you, weapons crates, or other supplies, but I'll get into those a little later. Back to the targeting computer, let's say you're on a night mission and it's really dark, but you know exactly where a glider is because you've locked onto it and you can see the lock on target moving. The crosshairs are green unless your alternate weapon is set to guided missiles, and in that case the crosshairs are red, and the computer voice will say,
Target locked.
As I mentioned, your hovercraft has a radar system. There is a large central view screen in your instrument panel that shows this, but the view screen can also show you a compass. You can toggle between the 2 displays.
Compass.
The compass shows cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, with a red arrow indicating which direction you're currently facing. Your mission objective is a big cyan-colored diamond, unless it's outside your immediate vicinity, in which case it's a big yellow-colored diamond. So this basically tells you the direction of your next major target, and this indicator turns blue when it's within range. The remaining number of targets you need to destroy in order to meet your overall mission objective is shown in the bottom right corner of the compass display. That's it for the compass, but the radar is a lot more interesting, so let's switch back to that.
Radar.
Your radar system is 3 concentric circles with a horizontal line through the center and vertical line down the middle. These lines don't move. If you want moving lines, use the compass, but this shows you all objects within a 360-degree radius from your hovercraft at the center. It has the same mission objective indicators, the big yellow or cyan-colored dot and the number in the bottom right corner, but it also shows you other things. Other enemies in the vicinity are smaller cyan dots, power-ups are orange dots, and active projectiles are green. Projectiles meaning missiles and mortars and stuff, not photon blasts, those don't show up at all. Those circles on the radar screen can also help with aiming your mortars. Roughly, your gun sight at the top of the screen will lob a mortar to just within the largest circle. The gun sight in the center of the screen will place the mortars right inside the middle circle, and the bottom of the screen matches the smallest circle. It's more of a rough guideline, but it's still pretty helpful in aiming your mortars. You will see a brief spot of white where your mortars land, so you can use that to help adjust your aiming. If you've obtained a lock on any of these enemies or power-ups using the targeting computer, you'll see what kind of looks like a mini version of the lock-on crosshairs red on the radar dot, whether or not you've got guided missiles selected. There are 2 more consumables that you need to keep track of, shields and energy. Shields indicate how much damage you can take before you go kaboom, while energy is used when you move around and fire your photon cannon. Each one of these has an on-screen indicator of vertical gauge labeled S for shields and E for energy. This gauge is blue when you're above 50%, blue is good, and yellow below that. Yellow is less good, but at least it's better than red.
Shields critical.
what little remains of your shields will start blinking red while the alarm klaxon sounds, and the display that would otherwise show your current weapon instead shows the flashing word alert with an exclamation point. The klaxon can be stopped by other weapons fire or explosions or by pausing and unpausing the game. Likewise, the same color coding applies to the energy gauge, and you also get a voice prompt and a different klaxon when that's low.
Energy critical.
Run out of either and you blow up. Okay, your hovercraft has one more standard feature, and that's a remote observation robot, kind of like a drone that follows your hovercraft around, but not close enough to take the damage that you're drawing from the Trakian firepower. Either that or the drone is just indestructible. It automatically launches when your craft is deployed and presumably returns at the end of your mission. You can switch to this drone's video feed at any time. You can move it around all the way around your hovercraft, zoom in, zoom out. This can give you some perspective, show you your immediate surroundings, maybe to get out of a tight spot, or maybe you just want to send a selfie back to your friends back on Earth. That's about it for your weapon systems and hovercraft capabilities in general. You can find weapons crates scattered around, as well as canisters to replenish your shield or energy. Pick up these supplies by driving over them. You can shoot them, but you don't get any points for that, and you'll probably need them, especially later in the game, so no, don't shoot them. You can use your targeting system to get an idea of what type of power-up is in your vicinity. The preview display will show a missile for any weapons, or a cylindrical thing for shields or energy. Up close, the weapons crates look like crates and provide you with 12 of one type of weapon, while the other supplies are in hexagonal canisters with the word fuel on the side and replenish about a quarter of that gauge. Your onboard computer will announce what you just picked up.
Missiles.
Or
Guided missiles.
Or
Mortars.
Or
Shields.
Or
Energy.
I probably didn't have to include all those sounds, but I went through the trouble of capturing them, so yeah, dang it, I'm going to include them. If you've already maxed out on a consumable, then you'll hear this sound. What a waste. There are a large number of different Trakian enemies you'll encounter in your quest, both on the ground and in the air. The manual includes what looks like a complete list, which is nice, but while the game awards points for destroying these things, there's no list of how many points you earn for each enemy type, so I gathered those numbers, and will include them here along with the enemy descriptions. First up, heavily armored tanks. These are big, tank-looking things, but like your hovercraft, the turret doesn't move independently, and the entire vehicle has to turn to face you. They're not quick, and they're not terribly observant. You can often sneak up on one from the side, and maybe take it out before it can complete its turn, which it might not even start until fired upon. Sneaking up on these is a good idea, because the business end shoots out missiles at a pretty decent rate. 2 of your own missiles will take this tank out, and you'll get 250 points for that. There's another type of tank, lighter in color but different in shape and a whole lot tougher. Its movement is less lethargic than the other tank too. The land crawler, it's called, can be identified by having tank treads that are much larger than the inner part of the tank, and you get 1,000 points for taking one of these out. There's a walking robot with big triangular legs, the MT Walker, also known as the Mad Dog. It's tough like a tank, but just when you think you've destroyed it and you get your 500 points, the head flies off, buzzes your hovercraft while rapidly firing green laser bolts at you. Unlike photon blasts, the lasers do show up on the radar, and these do hurt quite a bit when they hit you, especially given the rate at which the irritated walker heads shoot at you. Given enough time, the little flying head may make a kamikaze run, but if it misses, it just blows up. You don't get any points at all for destroying the head, but it is generally in your best interest to do so. Gun turrets. Your run-of-the-mill gun turrets have a stationary base and shoot lasers at you. If you destroy just the top of the turret, the part that turns and shoots but not the base, you get 1,000 points. Taking out the base first will only give you 100 points, but it does destroy the entire turret, and it is a bigger target to hit. Your targeting system, I should point out, does lock on to the base. So you can get up to 1100 points for these turrets, but you might take a couple laser blasts in the face in the process. Much more annoying than the gun turrets are the trapdoor turrets. They differ in a couple important ways. First, they shoot missiles at you, not lasers. Unlike lasers, you can shoot missiles out of the air, but the missiles do hurt more when they hit. The second difference is that these turrets are hidden until you approach, and then they pop out of the ground to take a shot. Sounds irritating, right? Scoring is similar, 200 points for the base, and you can take out the head first for an extra 1,000. If the head alone is destroyed, then the base will remain sticking out of the ground. Landmines. There are two types of mines. The first is stationary, but very hard to see if you're not using your radar and/or tracking system. They're skinny little things that hover off the ground, just like you. 50 points each. Then there are the magnetic mines. I guess Terrakian vehicles aren't magnetic, so your magnetic field will attract these guys from far and wide, and they make a rapid beeline for your hovercraft. But if you can shoot them first, you get 25 points. There is the Durian T5 jet. I wonder why we have brand names for some of these weapons, but not others. The T5 flies around and makes strafing runs at you with its laser cannon. The manual warns that T5s may try to ram you, but I don't know if that's just retconning for poor piloting skills. They generally fly low and straight, and you can get 50 points for blowing one up. There's a separate classification of enemies called floaters, anti-gravity aircraft a lot like yours, and you'll usually see them just off the ground following the terrain. There's the patrol floater. These may be one of the first enemies you encounter in the game. It has wings or something which curve down and slightly below the top part of the craft, kind of like the thing was designed to pick up boxes, but decided to go shooting at you instead with its twin photon cannons. 50 points for patrol floater. Dredging floaters have dangling arms and a single photon cannon. Sometimes you can find them carrying power-ups around, and if you destroy it, you can maybe grab the power-up. You can often find these guys spewing out of an underground dredging floater factory entrance. And if you wanted to point press and had a lot of time on your hands and energy nearby, you could park yourself outside one of these floater factory entrances and just pick them off for 50 points a pop. There's an irritating variation of the dredging floater called the cloaking floater. Can you guess what it can do? It's hidden until it fires, and then it flashes as it recloaks. You can still shoot it while it's cloaked if you know where to direct your fire, and don't count on your targeting system to save you either, since once it disappears from visual, it disappears from the scanner too, and if you had a target lock on it, that lock goes away as well. You get 100 points for a cloaking floater. Surveillance floaters are much more interested in watching you than attacking you, but they'll also attack you with their single photon cannon. They're shaped like kind of like a huge ice cream cone, but with big spikes sticking out of the sides, and instead of a delicious creamy frozen treat up top, you have a blue cube with an eyeball on each face. These guys skitter around a little ways in the distance, and because of their speed, they can be pretty tricky to shoot. I've seen them shake my guided missiles on multiple occasions, and this is weird. I've shot them with missiles, there's an explosion, target lock disappears, but there's still a floater right there, so either they have some special defense against guided missiles, or they bunch up with other surveillance floaters so tightly that they appear to overlap, up to 3 at a time. I'm not sure which is the case, but you get 100 points each time one explodes, or appears to. One last floater is called the Dreadnought. It sounds tough because it is, like a hovering tank. Unlike other floaters, these hover much closer to the ground, a little higher than you, in fact, and are a collision hazard. 3 or so rockets later, you get 500 points for one of these. Your mission objectives may be to destroy a certain number of these enemies, but more often you'll be targeting infrastructure. Here the manual doesn't provide a complete list, but I know you're dying to know what these things are, so here are the various enemy targets and installations. Fuel tanks, chemical labs, supply shuttles, radar dishes, sensor pods, giant missiles, power turbines, nuclear reactors, communication satellite dishes, processing stations, command centers, floater factory entrances, light siphons, parked aircraft, and atmospheric laser cannons. I didn't compile point values for all of these, though they do seem to be within the range of 250 to 1,000 points each, give or take. Okay, let's talk about the levels a little bit more. The game is split into 5 levels, each with 6 missions, and these missions each occur on different types of terrain. The terrain types are desert, volcanic, water, urban, ice, and unknown, the unknown missions occurring at night. So it kind of has all the bases covered if you wanted to be a stereotypical platform-style game, your desert level, your ice level, your volcano level, and so on. The water levels differ in that you're often on the open seas. The waves can push you up and down and around, so if you're prone to seasickness, maybe stock up on some Dramamine first. Disclaimer, there are no Dramamine tablet power-ups in this game. The ice levels have melted pits with undulating water, and the volcanic levels do as well, but with lava instead. There can be channels of lava that you'll need to traverse, often with steep edges. Remember that lava doesn't hurt you, but steep things will. All these levels have different textures. The ice ones are typically pretty bright, volcanic and urban are pretty dark. Urban levels often include lots of brick structures with metal panels riveted on. The night missions deserve special mention, though, because there are no textures. Everything is Gouraud shaded, which basically means smooth color shading around all the polygons. It looks fantastic when reflecting the light of your photons or flares. Shooting a photon off in the distance and seeing the surrounding hills light up, it's fantastic. But otherwise, your viewable distance is so small that you won't see an enemy right in front of you, so definitely use your radar and go slowly. I tend to fire off a few flares and quickly drive up to where they're fizzling out in the distance if the coast looks clear. Then I stop and do it again. Don't go too fast here, is basically what I'm saying. Slow and steady defeats the Terrakians, as the old saying goes. Starting a level, you can choose from any one of the 6 missions in any order. Launch a mission, and you'll soon see yourself lowered to the ground in a first-person perspective.
Prepare to launch.
Your carrier pilot must be in a big hurry to get out of there because he or she cuts loose a little higher than comfortable and you end up taking damage. Every single deployment, you take damage. Add to that the fact that the LZ is hot, so on top of the fall, you're likely to be under immediate enemy fire. Once you complete that mission, the music changes. This isn't a different song, but rather the main theme song, but about 3 minutes in. Your computer voice says,
Mission accomplished.
And your hovercraft carrier flies in. You change between the exterior camera and the regular first-person view. The carrier swoops in and picks you up, and then it's back to the mission selection screen. And now you have 5 to choose from. It only shows non-completed missions. By the way, you can skip the whole pickup sequence by pushing a button if you wanted to get back to the mission screen right away. Otherwise, the sequence can take a little over 30 seconds. Once you complete all 6 missions, you hear,
Congratulations.
and get the next set of 6 missions. Each mission has a name. Some of the cooler sounding names are Trapped Under Ice, The Unnatural Night, By Demons Be Conquered, River of Souls, Depths of Madness, Valley of Death Shadow, kind of ominous and poetic names like that. When choosing between your missions, you see several things. It'll say, select level 1 missions, or level 2, or whatever level you're on at the top, followed by the name of the selected mission, a wide, full-color picture of the terrain, a rotating globe with your orbiting carrier craft, the globe indicating the location of the landing zone on the planet, marked with a yellow X, and text listing out the terrain name and mission target. You can also see your number of lives, number of each type of weapon, your score, current difficulty level, and at the bottom some instructions on how to navigate and select the missions. After selecting a mission, you see a picture of the M100 galaxy, item number 100 in French astronomer Charles Messier's catalogue of objects which are not comets. I don't think including this image means that the planet Lancelewia actually is located in M100. That's like 55 million light years away, but I think the picture, it just looks cool. It's a pretty photogenic, grand design spiral galaxy, though in this image it looks like it was squished. The aspect ratio isn't right. The vertical axis was squished down, but if you look closely, its features are definitely M100. Anyway, this image is the backdrop for text, which scrolls up to describe your mission, and then the background fades out and a rotating image of your target appears. After this, you're ready to roll. You can't skip this sequence. Perhaps the level is loading in the background, so you'll need a little bit of patience. Once the target is displayed, which will be after about 12 or 14 seconds, press any button to launch. Any button, even pause or 0 or direction on the D-pad. When you lose a hovercraft, you get an exterior view. Your remote-operated camera drone, perhaps, spins around and shows your hovercraft blowing up. Once you've lost all of your hovercraft, it's game over. You see a cinematic sequence overlaid with some music. The Federation Armada approaches the planet only to be thoroughly obliterated by the atmospheric cannon. They never had a chance. The words "Game Over" appear on the screen in front of a red circle, and then if you had a high enough score, you get the high score entry screen. 10 names are shown on this screen, up to 5 letters each, plus the score, in green text on an expanding starfield background. Up and down to navigate through the alphabet, letters and numbers, left and right to change which letter is selected. I think there was supposed to be text displayed when you lose. I didn't see that at all in the game, but from what I was able to find out, the text should have read, "You have failed. The Federation Armada has been destroyed by the atmospheric cannon. The Terrakians continue to rule the planet and exterminate the colonists." Now, I said that there were 5 levels with 6 missions each, and that's true, but there's also a 6th level containing a single mission, and that's the final mission in the game. Completing that wins the game, and that will warrant a spoiler alert, but I should let you know that I'll also be covering the secret missions at the same time. There's a link between the two, so this section will run a little long. How long, I don't know, but Bishop does. Bishop, activate spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 6 minutes 34 seconds on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
The ending plays the title theme song and is an animated sequence showing a fleet of Federation assault spacecraft heading toward the planet while your hovercraft and carrier vehicle head away. I'm hoping there's a Federation mothership or something in the vicinity, because riding all the way back to Earth in your cramped little hovercraft, that doesn't sound like much fun. I don't even think it has a bathroom. You get some scrolling text after this, and the text differs depending on which skill level you are playing. On Easy, it says, "Congratulations, you have destroyed the Terrakian targets and the Federation invasion has begun. Unfortunately, this difficulty level does not prove your courage and skill. For a larger reward, try playing on a higher setting." Okay, so you play through the game again on normal, and you get this. "Congratulations, you have destroyed all the Terrakian targets and the Federation invasion has begun. The Hover Strike production team is impressed with your talents, but not enough to grant you the largest reward. Try playing on the highest level." Okay, so play through on the hard difficulty, and here's the ending. "Congratulations, you have destroyed all the Terrakian targets and the Federation invasion has begun. The Hover Strike production team is truly impressed with your talents. You have proven your courage, your skill, and your desire to succeed. You have reason to celebrate, and the following codes might come in handy. Press A to continue." Oh-ho, now we're getting somewhere. Press A to continue, as it says, and you get another section of scrolling text. Here's what it reads. Secret missions. There is 1 secret mission on each level. Each one is unique in appearance and construction. At the mission select screen, simultaneously press the following D-pad direction and number keys for the appropriate level. You will be able to select the secret mission for that level. Level 1, 2, 3, 6 and up. Level 2, 2, 6, 7, 8 and down. Level 3, 3, 5, 6 and right. Level 4, 2, 5, 8 and up. Level 5, 2, 4, 5, 6 and right. There's another code here, too. Invincibility and unlimited ammo. Simultaneously press the following keys for unlimited ammo, shields, and energy. And it says 3, 4, 6, 7, and down. Entering one of the codes during the mission selection screen will produce this sound. Now let's get into the secret missions. When you see them on your mission list, the wide picture in the background is replaced by a team photo, 15 people, although the second one from the left could be a robot or Death Incarnate or something. Black hooded figure with a mask. They're superimposed over an exotic landscape, and most of the people in the photo are wearing sunglasses. Most of the ones that aren't seem to be squinting, so this must have been a bright Southern California day when the photo was taken. The preview text for the secret missions in level 1, 3, and 4 also include the words "Collect Power-Ups" on the screen. In Level 1, the secret mission is called The Drive for 5, with an exclamation point. And the description reads, "Congratulations, you have found the first secret mission. Your target is within striking distance, but first you should stock up on ammunition." So you can max out all of your weapons here, no problem, before taking out the entrance to the dredging floater factory. The terrain is described as bizarre, and that is certainly the case. There are light and darker blue textures, along with triangular brown and green slime-looking textures, and occasional craters are filled with distorted pictures, presumably of the developers' faces. Though I do see that texture around processing stations, too. The Level 2 secret mission has a great setup. It's named Barbecue, and the description is, "Reports have come in that Tarakian terrorist Baba Booey is stealing rations from our established military command post. Save the barbecue before the troops go hungry." The terrain is called Hell, and much of the surface is appropriately a reddish-orange writhing texture with hills textured in skulls. Again, these skulls are something that you're likely to see around processing stations, but still, it's all a little Doom-like. Level 3's secret mission is named Leonard, Is That You? Almost certainly a reference to Leonard Trammell. The description says, "Collect as many power-ups as you can. There are no shield or energy power-ups, so clear out the targets carefully." The extreme terrain is made up of long icy stripes punctuated with purple hills, writhing green slime, and some more run-of-the-mill gray textures with vertical water walls and triangular lava patches. It's a texture salad here, to be sure. The secret mission for Level 4 is called Cape Canaveral. That's Kenaveral, maybe named after game artist Ken Saunders. He also worked on level design, including this very mission, so maybe he named it after himself. The description reads, "Planes circle the ocean protecting many power-ups. Destroy the 16 parked jets to finish the mission." The terrain is called Wet, and it's pretty much all sand and surf, beaches, and open water, though there is a huge complex of small stone mesas off to one side of this gigantic map. And finally, Level 5's secret mission is named A Vulgar Display of Power. Your objectives in the previous secret missions are the same types of things you'll find in the regular missions, but here in Level 5, the secret mission's objective is 2 competitive game manufacturers, though the preview image doesn't look like game manufacturers at all. Here's the description. "You finally made it. Thumbs tired? Don't stop now as you witness the enormity of Fuji City 64. The Hoverstrike development team thanks you. Good luck." Lots of exclamation points there. The terrain for this one is California, and it doesn't really look like California. It's all lava mounds and basalt. Interestingly, though, along the high cliff faces, you'll find things written out in large panels of lava. I see the word Jaguar, the number 64, a Fuji symbol, and more surprisingly, the NI and backwards N stylized acronym for 9 Inch Nails. So, along with Metallica earlier, and of course, Vulgar Display of Power being an album by heavy metal band Pantera, that makes at least 3 music references in this game. There are turrets perched on many of these tall lava mounds, big tanks, little tanks, walkers, dreadnoughts, floater factory entrances, and not a lot of power-ups, so this level is pretty brutal. It's gigantic too, really massive. I didn't finish it.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is hovering around spoiler-free.
Hoverstrike is designed around and makes good use of a standard Atari Jaguar controller, not so much the Pro controller. The 3 fire buttons by default are laid out a whole lot like they are in Cybermorph. A accelerates, B fires your photon cannon, and C brakes. It doesn't reverse like in Cybermorph though. If you wanted to shift in reverse, that's a little more complicated. Hold the D-pad down while also holding the A and C buttons. To go back into forward gear, hold up on the D-pad along with the A and C buttons. It's possible to change these button assignments, though now that I think about it, I didn't test out how that affects changing into reverse, though I'd guess it would still be holding down whatever buttons are assigned to driving and stopping at the same time. Either way, I'll talk about how to change your button layout in a few minutes. The option button cycles through your alternate weapon systems, missiles, guided missiles, mortars, and flares if you're playing a night level. The pause button will pause the game. A wide beveled rectangle appears in the center of the screen showing the word paused. If you push A, B, or C while paused, you'll get the pause menu. The pause menu is navigated with the D-pad, has at least 2 volume sliders, one for music and one for the overall volume, including both music and sound effects. Below the volume sliders is an option to abort the mission. If you abort, you return to the mission selection screen, and your ammo counts and score are restored to where they were before you landed. It's like the mission never happened. This can be handy if you change your mind, or, as you can imagine, if you're getting absolutely pummeled and your shields are about to fail, it's probably a good idea to abort the mission rather than lose a ship. When you select the abort mission option, you are given a confirmation dialog. The last option on the pause menu is exit pause, which you'll need to use to exit this menu since you can't push pause again from here to exit. You need to select exit pause. Pushing 1 and 3 at the same time does not hide the paused graphic as it does in other Jaguar games. Instead, it unpauses the game, which I think should be considered a bug. The D-pad, as I mentioned before, will turn you left or right and raise your gun sight up and down. There is an option to change that if you prefer your Y-axis reversed, and I'll talk about that shortly. The number pad is used heavily here, and the game shipped with an overlay to help you keep all those buttons straight. I didn't know where my overlay was at first, so I just learned all the buttons, and that worked just fine. The overlay did turn up eventually. I had apparently stuffed it in with the Unconquered Lands overlay in the CD trifold. The 2 overlays are slightly different, actually, so I could tell which one was which. Buttons 1 and 3, the top corners of the keypad, those fire your secondary weapon, missiles and mortars and stuff. The 2 button in between locks on to the closest target. The 5 button, directly below that, will cycle between the targets within range. The 4 and 6 buttons will toggle between the radar and the compass. Both buttons do the same thing. 7 and 9 are also toggles, switching between the external camera view,
External monitor.
and your normal first-person view. The 8 button in between, if you hold that while in the external camera view, you can adjust the position of the external camera using the D-pad, left, right, in, and out. You may have noticed that the buttons on the sides of the keypad are ambidextrous. Both sides do the same thing. And the ones in the middle, I think, are pretty logically placed, so I think the keypad is laid out very well. At the very bottom of the keypad, the star and hash buttons are unlabeled on the overlay, except for the note that holding down both simultaneously will reset the game. The 0 button in the bottom center is labeled music, and will toggle the music on and off. The overlay has yellow-orange buttons with full-color icons. The name of the game, Hover Strike, is shown on either side of the overlay in green text. Along the top of the overlay, it tells you what the option button does. From the mission selection screen, holding star, option, and hash will reset the cartridge memory to default, wiping any high scores and saved game data. For the cooperative 2-player mode, player 1 controls are just the same, but player 2 has a different control set. By default, up, down, left, and right on the D-pad will move the gun sight in those directions. This is full 2D movement rather than player 1 just moving up and down. The B button fires the photon cannon, just like usual, but A will fire the current alternate weapon, much better than reaching down to the keypad. The C button will cycle the alternate weapon systems, like player 1's option button, but is easier to reach and more responsive, being a hard plastic fire button rather than a little squishy rubber button in the center. The keypad still largely works for player 2 with a few exceptions. Buttons 1, 8, and 9 don't seem to do anything, which is weird. I double-checked with different controllers too, so it's not just my controller. Overall, though, it's a good layout, but player 1 can totally mess with what player 2 is doing, so the manual urges communication, which is usually a good thing for teamwork. Booting up the game gives you blackness, a black screen as the music kicks in. The theme song starts with the hovering sound, and then a full screen rendered image appears using a dissolve effect. I like the music first, then visual approach. The TV show NYPD Blue, if you remember that show, that used to do that all the time. The full screen image is a static image showing a landscape like a cracked riverbed with a hovercraft off to the right. We see it from a rear 3/4 angle, narrowly avoiding a couple landmines, and simultaneously blasting a couple things with lasers, which you don't actually have. Looks like a dredging floater and, I don't know, maybe one of those Durian T5 jets on the ground. Above, you can see your carrier flying away, and some emission nebulae in the black sky above. About a second later, the name of the game fades in with the letters protruding from the riverbed at the bottom of the screen, along with some boring white copyright text. In the top left center are the words, Fire A for new game, Fire B for saved game. We will do neither right now. We will sit and wait for the attract mode, and that starts about 8 seconds after the title screen is first displayed. We fade to black, then zoom in on the revolving planet of Lanceluia. It's very Earth-like, largely covered in water, but with the continents dispersed more widely across the surface than you'll find on the Earth. You don't see any clouds, but there is a polar ice cap up north. Text scrolls up, describing the game's story: missing colonists, Terrakian pirates, atmospheric cannon, you leading the preemptive strike to knock out key targets, basically what I described earlier. About a minute later, you're back on the title screen for about 10 seconds, and then you get the credits. Your hovercraft is seen rotating up top while the credits scroll up from the bottom. The hovercraft it's not a pretty thing. It looks like it was built out of rusty metal. There's a hexagonal base, a smaller cockpit up top. The cockpit is set to one side of the hovercraft, toward the back. It's got 6 windows on it, 2 large ones in the center, 1 on either side, and 2 up top, giving it kind of an angry eyebrow look. And there's a cannon above that. It's clearly a utilitarian beast, not something that's going to win any beauty awards at the next car show or hovercraft show or whatever they do in the future. As the scrolling credits are done, takes about 23 seconds, we're back to the title screen again, and then off to a gameplay demo showing the first level mission called Vulcan Shootout, starting with a mission briefing with a M100 Galaxy picture in the background, and then about 45 seconds of actual gameplay. After another trip to the title screen, we see the high scores. By default, the names are Carrie, Chris, Dennis, Ed, Hank, Harry, Joe, Ken, Lance, and Tal, with scores ranging from 5,000 at the bottom to 50,000 at the top in increments of 5,000. You see the high scores for about 8 seconds, and then the whole loop begins again. The theme song is pretty long and will start to repeat itself after about 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The opening hover sound, that's just for the very beginning, and you don't hear that again. Okay, at any point during attract mode, pressing a button will take you back to the title screen, and from there it's, as I said, A for a new game or B for a saved game. Pressing A will start you off on level 1 with 12 of each of your weapons. Pressing B will take you to wherever you left off, the last time you saved, which stores the level number, the list of remaining missions, your weapon counts, remaining lives, and score. Shield and energy levels are recharged before each mission, so those values don't need to be saved. I've already described the mission selection screen, but this is also where you can adjust some of your settings. Push Option from there and you're given a menu. This menu has music and main volume levels, just like the pause menu, but also has options for save game, buttons, and joypad. Selecting buttons, you can push left or right to cycle between the button assignments that are shown on the screen, and then A, B, or C to save those assignments as shown and continue. Selecting joypad will let you change the direction for raising and lowering the gun sight. If you prefer to invert your Y-axis, this is where you would do that. Left or right to toggle between the options, and then a button to save. For the save game option, you are asked to confirm. Controller configuration, volume settings, and high scores are saved automatically when changed. I think the save system is done very well. Configuration changes may be automatic, but the mission progress is not. So if you just came back from a miserable mission where you lost 2 of your hovercraft and used up most of your ordnance, you don't have to save unless you really want to, which in that case I don't think you should. I've already described much of your in-game view. The control panel takes up roughly the lower third of your screen. Lots of high color gradient use here. It looks pretty sharp. Dead center, a square within a hexagon, is your radar or compass, whichever is currently selected. To the left, you have your weapon counts, the horizontal bar indicators followed by the number of rounds remaining for that weapon. Below this is your shield gauge. Symmetrically, on the right is a picture of the currently selected weapon with the energy gauge below that. The current weapon picture is replaced by the word alert when you're low on shields or energy, or both. Above and to the right of the current weapon indicator is the screen which will show in a green wireframe image what your targeting system has locked onto. Elsewhere, in the top left corner of your screen is a tiny view of your hovercraft with a yellow number indicating the number of remaining hovercraft. In the top right corner is your score. The external camera view has a different layout. The background is made up of a bunch of gray panels with etched patterns and designs in various components colored yellow or red. There's a little square in the top left corner, inset with a shiny metal frame. This shows the number of remaining hovercraft. A large window in the center, again with a shiny metallic frame, shows the actual view of the remote camera. And slightly overlapping this window is another inset panel, this one with the various gauges and indicators. From left to right, you have the shield level. This looks a whole lot like the one in the cockpit, but bigger. Then a compass, the radar view, the currently selected alternate weapon, and the energy gauge. The current weapon also shows the number remaining. The picture of the weapon is larger and more detailed than what you get inside your hovercraft. Centered right above the instrument panel is your current score. Now, you could technically try playing the game with this external view, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's more designed for occasional reference than for trying to take out enemies. Aside from the night missions, the game is rendered entirely in texture-mapped polygons. But wait, you might say, I thought the Jaguar wasn't good at texture mapping. And that's true, 10 times slower than plain cybermorph style. Gouraud shading is the number I read. This was in an interview with ATD, Edge Magazine, February 1994. Texture mapping wasn't really part of the Jaguar's design, but the blitter can step through X and Y coordinates independently, and whether or not that's the technique used here in Hoverstrike, the upshot is that full texture mapping is slow, and the frame rate suffers as a result. Playing the game, I saw frame rates ranging from 8 to 10 frames per second, and some textures slow the game more than others. For example, by Demons Be Conquered, the level 2 volcanic mission, you'll find a pair of pyramid-shaped structures at the mouth of the lava canyons, at least one of the lava canyons. And each one of these pyramid faces is a large texture showing two larger-than-life naked humans with their arms up over their heads. Looks like a carving or a relief. But moving around or simply rotating toward these structures, the frame rate drops noticeably, about 6 frames per second. Lava channels are just as bad, and also a large number of enemies on screen, like at the entrance to a floater factory spewing out dredging floaters. That can slow the game down too. The textures aren't just mapped to flat objects. Water and lava and maybe some of the other textures you'll encounter will writhe and roll, bucking you around. At the edge of water where it meets the land, there will be something like sea foam, and if it meets a beach, some wet sand, which are nice little visual details. Explosions are not just clouds of fire, but there are bits of raining debris. These are not as satisfying as the explosions in Iron Soldier, but are still fairly decent, though your frame rate will sometimes take a temporary dive. The explosions in Hoverstrike reminded me of the debris and stuff that you see raining down in the Lynx game Blue Lightning, maybe because I just talked about that game in a recent episode of the Atari Lynx Handycast. Being under the best of circumstances a very dimly lit planet, your viewable distance isn't very far, but terrain, and to a lesser extent, objects tend to fade in from the distance, not abruptly pop in like you see in Cybermorph. Above the horizon, you'll see stars and a few large planets or moons. These can actually be used for bearings if you didn't want to use your compass, because they happen to line up right at the cardinal points. The big Earth-like planet is the north, the large red planet is the south, and there are smaller red planets or moons to the east and west. East is a little higher up and has more surface detail. When you take damage, which you will, your entire screen will flash, apparently changing to an inverse color palette for a split second. You may also notice some color changes in your gun sight. It seems to change color slightly when placed over an obstruction. If I were to guess, I'd say that this is done with a level of transparency afforded by the Read Modify Write, or RMW bit, in the Jaguar's color space. I talk a little more about RMW in the Rebooteroids episode, Homebrew Episode 1, but this effect can be helpful in identifying an obstruction before you can actually see it there on the screen, given your limited viewing distance. So everything is texture mapped, except, as I said, at night when everything is Garage shaded. The usual draw distance is much shorter, but the light from flares or photons off in the distance looks pretty cool. Somewhat surprisingly, though, the frame rate is about the same at night as it is during the day, such as it is. It's a difference of maybe 2 frames per second. Now, on a forum thread on Atari Age, Vlad R. postulates that perhaps they didn't update the sync logic across multiple frames, capping the frame rate to avoid handling multiple corner cases. Not impossible to do, he says, but a lot of extra coding work. This was in relation to something regarding the CD version of Hover Strike, Unconquered Lands, but I think it might apply here as well. So I had finished a mission and was waiting for extraction by the hover carrier. My hovercraft was near a tall ridge, and I expected clipping issues as the hover carrier swooped in to pick me up. I expected it to pass right through the ridge, but it didn't. It intentionally navigated over the hills and came to pick me up. The frame rate was pretty low, but I didn't expect a cinematic sequence to pay any attention to clipping. But it did, though, to its credit. The sound effects in-game are explosions, and driving, and shooting. They seem fitting enough. Enemies are silent aside from their weapons fire, so a jet sailing overhead, or a turret popping out of the ground, or a walker, walking, none of those have their own sound effects. There is stereo separation in this game, so if you have stereo output, you can use that as a hint for where incoming fire is originating. Oh, there's the computer voice too, but she only pops up when changing or picking up weapons and for critical game events. Just the right amount of voice input, I think. She's not going to congratulate you just for blowing something up.
Good work.
Which honestly starts to feel a little hollow after a while. Like she doesn't really mean it, Aaron Carson voices the unnamed computer assistant in Hover Strike. Moving on to music, this was written by Brad Waite, and sounds to me like 4-channel Pro Tracker style module music. It relies perhaps a bit too much on a distorted guitar sample, but I think it's pretty good overall. The title theme, as I said, is a little over 4 minutes before looping, and there are 4 gameplay tracks ranging from 1 minute 10 seconds to 2 minutes 15 seconds before looping. There's also an additional music track that only shows up for night missions. I'm not including it in the little musical interludes that are sprinkled throughout the show, so here's a sample. This one is very long, believe it or not. I clocked it at looping at just under 3 minutes 59 seconds with a short, non-repeated intro. B. Hodges I've mentioned in several previous episodes because he wrote several excellent walkthroughs and guides on GameFAQs.com. In his entry for Hover Strike, he says that the tunes themselves aren't bad, but the sound quality is terrible, sounding like it came from a first-generation Genesis game. I only have one first-generation Genesis game in my meager collection, and that is Space Harrier 2. So let's include a little bit of that music for comparison. This game has cheat codes, lots of cheat codes, and not just your usual level select and invincibility, but it also has some interesting and inventive little tidbits. I think they're interesting, at least. Let's check them out. First, level skip. You can bypass all remaining missions on a level and move ahead to the next level by going to the mission selection screen and holding down the buttons 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Yes, all at the same time. If you have a third hand, now would be the time to use it. You will hear
Congratulations
and see the next level's set of missions. As long as you're here in the mission selection screen, you know the planet spinning around in the middle of the screen that shows the selected mission's destination? You can adjust how fast that revolves on its axis, even change the direction by using the 4 and 6 buttons on the keypad. You might think, well, right there's a good way to wipe out all the Terrakians. Yes, bad things happen if a planet stops spinning, link in the show notes, but there are also humans on Lancelluia, the colonists, the people that you're trying to save, so it's a good thing that pushing 4 and 6 doesn't actually affect the surface of the planets. But it can still look pretty silly, spinning like mad while your hovercraft carrier is in a gentle equatorial orbit. Moving on, but sticking with codes that work on the mission selection screen, you can give yourself an extra hovercraft by holding down the buttons 3, 6, 9, and hash. You'll hear this sound. And can give yourself up to 9 hovercraft in reserve. A few minutes ago I talked about what your external camera view looks like when you switch to the drone's video feed. I keep saying drone, the manual of course doesn't use that word, but if the game came out today it probably would, so I'll stick with that. The border around the screen had technical looking gray panels and stuff, right? Well, you can change that by holding right on the D-pad while you hold down C, 1, 4, and 5 buttons. You'll hear, but you won't see anything different until you enter a mission and select the external view.
External monitor.
Now, instead of those gray panels and stuff, you have a baby photo on the left, some red tally marks on the right, 9 I guess, and a rim of a full cup of coffee toward the bottom. Coffee. All the rest of the information is the same, this code just gives it some character. If you wanted to give your computer voice a little more character, try holding down C, 4, and 8 on the mission selection screen. Now, when you're in a mission and you run out of ammo, instead of hearing
Ammunition depleted.
You'll hear
Sorry, you shot your load.
Definite double entendre going on there. Let's see, what else? There's the secret missions, but I already mentioned those in the spoiler alert section, so I'll skip those here. I'll go ahead and mention the invincibility, though. Full shields, energy, and all weapons. It's basically IDDQD and IDKFA in one, if you get that reference. For the mission selection screen, hold down on the D-pad while you hold the buttons 3, 4, 6, and 7. Again, you'll hear. There are some codes that work during actual gameplay, too. The first one, if you hold up, A, B, C, and 0, you can cycle to a different background music track. It works best if you hit all these buttons simultaneously and maybe hold them down for about a second. I wasn't able to cycle to the night mission song when on a day mission, but I could do the other 4. Likewise, if you're on a night mission, you can't cycle back to the night mission theme once you've started checking out the other songs. Here's a weird one. In the game, hold up, A, B, C, and the 3 button all at the same time. The Atari Age tips and cheats page for Hover Strike says that this alters your ground clearance, but for me it totally screws up the textures. Whether or not there's any practical difference in your hovering height, it's hard for me to say. It's a toggle though, so you can use the same sequence to turn it off. Finally, you can turn any level into a night level by holding up, A, B, C, and 7. You lose visibility and everything else loses textures, and flares are automatically added to your secondary weapon arsenal. You can also use this to switch out of night mode if you wanted less of a challenge there. If you're curious, the textures that you're missing out on playing night mode, they don't really look like much, just basic normal game textures. Atari Age lists another cheat code, debug mode, activated by holding up, A, B, C, and 6. Now, below your number of remaining ships, you'll find several sets of numbers. 2 on the top line, 4 rapidly changing lines of numbers on the subsequent lines, and then some single-digit numbers that don't seem to change much. Atari Age says that the top right number is your current frame rate, and that may be accurate. That's what I used for my frame rate numbers earlier. Unlike, say, Invincibility, this one would need to be re-entered for each mission you encounter. Hover Strike shipped with a box, manual, and keypad overlay. The box has a unique stylized treatment of the name that I won't begin to describe, and the artwork shows a front view of your hovercraft, 2 patrol floaters closing in from behind, 1 turret on a high cliff shooting its green laser, and the flaming wreckage of another turret on a neighboring cliff. The box includes the 1 or 2 player icon indicating cooperative. First time I've seen that, I think. The ESRB rating is below that, K to A, kids to adults. And there is a screenshot up front showing an urban mission. If I were to guess, I'd say it was the one called River of Souls. And you're facing roughly north with some enemy target or another exploding. Around back are 4 additional screenshots, one showing an external view, another showing your carrier craft swooping in to pick you up at the end of the mission, and the third is a large explosion in your face with an enemy craft carrying power-ups off in the distance. The final one is an exchange of fire with a tank in an ice level. The text is available in English, German, and French. The English one reads, "The ultimate war machine is here. You fear the worst for the missing colonists. Tarakian pirates have taken over the distant planet with their deadly machines patrolling every section of the surface. The Federation has chosen you to launch a preemptive strike. Your vehicle is a state-of-the-art armored hovercraft equipped with rapid-fire cannon and powerful missiles. Anti-grav units enable it to float over any terrain. Battle through 30 fully texture-mapped 3D levels, including night vision missions. Knock out key targets and make way for the Federation Armada. Save the colony before it's too late." The text is very similar to the story shown in-game during the attract sequence. It takes out a couple sentences and adds the thing about 30 texture-mapped 3D levels, but it's largely the same. The cartridge shows a section of the box on the right with the logo positioned to the left. The manual is a stapled monochrome booklet, 85 internal pages, but this includes all 3 languages. There's the background story, largely matching the in-game scrolly text and the back of the box, but longer. The manual includes all the things that you would want in a manual, screen diagrams, pictures, and descriptions of weapons and enemies, and some gameplay hints. Let's read those now. Well, they're kind of long. I'll paraphrase instead. Tapping the A button while turning can help you make sharper turns. The manual lists this out in more detail, but that's the gist. Use the 5 key often when navigating through heavily occupied areas. 5, you'll remember, cycles through targets, so the manual suggests this is a way to plot strategies like targeting the floater factory entrances first rather than all the floaters hovering about. Or floating about, I suppose. Avoid slamming into steep mountains or falling off high ledges. It says here to pay particular attention to your terrain during night missions, laying down several flares at a time. Search the urban missions for hidden passages within some structures. They might be the only way to find a target. Know your enemy and what type of weapon to use. Don't waste rockets where a couple photons would do the job. Use the planets in the sky for navigation, which I mentioned a little while ago. These celestial objects are very intentionally placed there, it would seem. The manual also includes a full-scale picture of the overlay. Back of the manual has a couple of pages for notes, and a picture of your hovercraft appears over the Jaguar claw marks on the very back cover, with a patrol floater overhead. I'm not sure I've seen the back cover modified like this in the other games I've covered so far. There is a startling lack of consistency in how the name of the game is presented. Is it 1 word or 2? When it's shown in plain text in the game, which it does in 2 different places. One time it's 1 word, and the other time it's 2 words. The overlay shows Hover Strike as 1 word, but the manual, where it's written out in text, it's 2 words, like in the table of contents and in the copyright info. Also, the follow-up game, Unconquered Lands, shows Hover Strike as 2 words on the spine of the CD case, so I'm going with 2 words here, officially, for the name of the game. 9 pages of the Atari Jaguar Gamer's Guide are dedicated to Hover Strike, including basic strategies out of the manual, some hints for each type of terrain you'll encounter, and basic walkthroughs for each of the missions. It also includes a list of who designed which world, and it looks like all the cheat codes except for changing the in-game music, the different ammo depletion message, and the debug mode. I didn't find any print ads specifically for this game, though it's included in at least 2 general-purpose Jaguar magazine advertisements. Let the Games Begin and Best Games, Best System, whatever. In the former, it's called Battlezone 2000, as I mentioned at the beginning, and the latter shows this same screenshot used on the front of the box and includes a quote from Electronic Gaming Monthly. Where they got that quote, I'm not quite sure. EGM did not review this game, but there is a 2-page preview in their May 1995 issue. It may as well be a review. The author said that he found himself getting frustrated with the game more than anything else, and that the control is really lacking. Not a fan of the hovercraft movement. Annoying is the word he said. He said that he doubts you'd like it, way too frustrating to play, and, quote, unless you play this game endlessly and master the controls, forget beating it, end quote. There are some screenshots and comments about 4 of the first level missions. GamePro did have a formal review in their June 1995 issue, so looking at that, reviewer Scary Larry says that Hoverstrike tried to eat into the shockwave shooter market, referring to the 3DO game, though I think that claim is highly debatable. Aside from the in-cockpit perspective, Hoverstrike and Shockwave appear to be very different games. Anyway, he says that Hoverstrike suffers from dismal controls and interminable slowness. The mission directives, quote, are broad in scope and too short in direction, as your radar screen lacks the precision you need to locate objectives easily, end quote. He calls the controls finger-numbing, having to use the number on the keypad to fire a missile or manipulate the external monitor. He says the steering is poor and the enemies are hard to target. He calls the graphics clean and says that they compare well to other shooters, again referring to Shockwave and saying that some of the enemies are direct copies, but I can't validate that claim, not too familiar with Shockwave myself. He describes the music as hover hop, which I didn't know was a thing, but I'll go with it. And he isn't fond of the sound effects or the computer voice, calling the latter, quote, an annoying mechanical nag.
Sorry.
In summary, he says that the game could be a contender if not for the syrupy slowness and serious control problems. Several pro tips are sprinkled throughout, one under each screenshot. Targeting is harder in the external monitor view, but the range is broader than the regular view. Don't waste valuable missiles or mortars on short-range enemies. Red dots on the radar indicate power-ups, but be on your toes if a swarm of green dots are guarding them. Apparently his colors don't match my colors. In the industrial assault area, stay along the road to destroy the missile sites. That's spelled S-I-G-H-T-S, not S-I-T-E-S. Watch out for the acidic pools that line the road. It takes 2 missile hits to destroy large radar dishes. In the desert swarm area, immediately back up and start shooting these mines before they ram you. Pay close attention to the mission objectives at the beginning. They show you a visual of your target. Ratings are broken out by category on a scale of 1 to 5, graphics 4.0, sound 3.5, control 2.5, and fun factor 3.0. According to Jeff's Jaguar Jungle, Game Informer gave Hoverstrike a 3 out of 10, but I don't have any more detail than that, unfortunately. Arethius of the Atari Gaming Connection in France was kind enough to send me some scans and translations of French and German magazine reviews of Hoverstrike, and there are many more of these than I got out of the US. So let's go through those, starting with Consoles Plus. This is a full-page ad, and the game's rating is broken down into several categories. Presentation is 75%, graphics 76%, animation 77%, music 40%. It says practically non-existent, if I'm translating that correctly. I don't get that. Anyway, difficulty 78%, game length 79%, playability 72%, and the overall score is 70%. There's a section of this review, it kind of looks like a second opinion entitled We May, Yes But, and here is how the section translates, courtesy of Arethius. Apparently, Atari is not eager to demonstrate the, quote, famous 64 bits of its Jaguar. Compared to the other games from the same genre on PlayStation and Saturn, Hover Strike does not hold much. The vehicle is hard to control and imprecise. The real-time 3D is not correctly handled here. There are slight lags, and the field view makes it difficult to shoot precisely. There are other slight issues to be mentioned, but just let them aside. Once you have mastered the controls, the game offers quite an interesting experience in the simulation/arcade genre. In the end, nothing really exciting. Next up, Joypad Magazine. This is given an overall rating of 55%, and the translation is, "It does seem exciting. Unfortunately, the technique does not hold on. It is really disappointing for the so-called 64 bits. Of course, everything is rendered in real-time 3D, but as the field lacks details, it does not shine as a technical achievement. There is void everywhere. We are reminded that we are playing a video game and not staring at a flat image due to the few intruders left to destroy. It might be mean, but how can I react any other way in this era of full interactivity offered by almost all other 3D games? Go check out the Power Drive preview on the same console, you'll feel better." That's referring to the game Power Drive Rally, which I believe is coming up soon on this podcast. Player One magazine gives a 2-page review of Hover Strike, where the overall score is 90%. Player Fun, 95%, Graphics, 93%, Animation, 88%, Sound, 91%, and Playability, 95%. That's a very positive review. Let's check out Arethius' translation. Hover Strike is one of the few games to really take advantage of the capabilities of the Jaguar. A must-have shoot-'em-up for everyone having a Jaguar. But there are dissenting opinions, the first from Millhouse. "It won't be with Hover Strike that the Jaguar will impress me. While looking at the pictures, I said, whoa, a 3D game. I put the game cartridge in the Jaguar and then... The aim of texture-mapped 3D is to offer a realistic animation, but in the case of Hover Strike, it is so slow and lagged that you will need an expert eye to see the texture-mapped 3D. And the second dissenting opinion comes from Steph. "I have heard the Jaguar was a 64-bit console. Some even say it is powerful. The Jaguar is the subject to lots of praised rumors. With Hover Strike, we find the good old game principle. I see, I shoot, I pick up energy packs. And in this case, there are little changes in the graphics nor the action. This game is so boring that it gave hallucinations to this poor Wolfen." Wolfen. I am not familiar with that word. Hold on. Okay, according to Urban Dictionary, Wolfen refers to a rail shooter or flight sim game a la Star Fox. Either that or someone very hairy, but I'm pretty sure the other definition fits better. Besides, Jeff Minter didn't work on this game. ST Magazine, this review is mixed in with a couple other Jaguar games, no pictures, but the conclusion reads, "The game is actually quite addictive, and at the end you'll forget that this is not that good looking. The enemies are texture mapped as well. As for the relief of the terrain, you can switch to an out view, and at the end the game is quite good looking. In short, Hover Strike is an interesting game that I would like to recommend, if not for Cybermorph. Both games are in the end quite similar. Hover Strike will provide a feeling of deja vu if you have played Cybermorph. It would have been better to invent something totally new for this game." Arethius includes a note saying that the reviewer, Mark Abramson, quote, "often said that he was not really a gamer. This might explain the strange comment," end quote. So those are the French language magazines. There are also 3 German language reviews for which Arethius has provided links and translations. The links are in the show notes, and the translations, at least the summaries, I'll read right now. ST Computer, September 1995. "It is true that the missions in Hover Strike are not very varied, nor are they strategic or challenging as in Cybermorph or Iron Soldier. However, the player got a bit of compassion with the quality of the graphics and the 2-player mode. Ratings are graphics 75%, sound 60%, fun 80%, and overall 75%. Mega Fun, June 1995. "Hover Strike has to fight with lots of approach difficulties. Despite some level-specific textures, the graphics are not that special. However, I already saw worse on the Jaguar. The aim of the game is quite similar with Cybermorph, the 3D shooter from attention to detail. The whole just falls apart rather quickly. The controls of the hovercraft will take time to get used to, and the shooting through the aiming cross is more a gamble than a precise shoot. The outside perspective is superfluous and unplayable because of the small and unclear screen window, referring to the fancy gray border around the outside. The degree of difficulty was also unhappily calculated. While the first level fell like a breeze, by the second mission, it goes up at full speed to the frustration border. Too many opponents, too few ammunition and energy crates. Only the 3D freaks, which would like once again to bite the dust, should test Hover Strike. So, 3D freaks with a death wish, I guess. Graphics 66%, sound 62%, and fun 62%. Finally, video games, June 1995. Right after the first minutes of the game, I found out that the controls of Hover Strike are more than adaptation needy. Because it is all about hovercraft and those things float naturally about the ground, that is understandable and is no big deficiency. In contrast to Air Cars, a comparable game in terms of gameplay and concept, the whole landscape scenery, including the enemy's objects, was covered with textures. The optical expenditure has its price again. The scrolling falls out together and is a little too stumbling. Result, Hover Strike cannot convince, neither in terms of gameplay nor technicality. I can only recommend this new Jaguar cart to hard-boiled ball game fans. Graphics 70%, music 48%, sound effects 47%, and fun 60%. Thank you so much, Arethius, for the European perspective. Looking at Atari Explorer Online, I didn't see a formal review, just a score appearing in the August 1995 issue, 7 out of 10, which dropped to 5 out of 10 when Jaguar Explorer Online took over in March of 1997. There are 5 external reviews for Hover Strike listed on Atari Age, with a high of 85% and a low of 40%, and all those average out to 64%.
Prepare to launch.
If all those reviews have you thinking that you must get this game right now, how much should you expect to pay? Well, the game is listed as a rarity of 3 out of 10 on Atari Age, so it shouldn't be too hard to come by. Video 61 has the game listed new for $40. The Goat Store has a similar price for a new cart, or $18 used. B&C Computer Visions has the game listed new for $30. Best Electronics has the game listed complete in box for $30 and loose for $24. You can find links to all these vendors in the show notes. Taking a look at recent sales on eBay, I've seen loose cartridges selling for $23 to $25, though one of those also came with a copy of Cybermorph. A couple complete packages sold for $25, and a re-shrink-wrapped game without the overlay sold for $30, and a couple other complete packages for $30 to $40. So, quite a few recent sales, and the prices aren't too bad. There are also empty boxes for sale, but I don't usually include those. Currently, I see listings for loose carts between $20 to $27 and complete in box for around $30. Always check listings to confirm that the overlay is included, unless that really doesn't matter to you. On the Atari Age High Score Club, it looks like the high score was set by Avery Blue Monkey, 286,125 points, set in April of 2011. Before I added my own scores, my cartridge had a few old entries on high score table. Jay with 21,625 points, Foxen with 26,850 points, a blank name with 27,575, and Tweak with 42,425. I don't know these people. I think my brother might have been Tweak, and the others his friends at college. As for me, I don't have a high score to report because I haven't played this game through honestly, for reasons that I'll discuss right after this. I have never played Hover Strike before, not before researching this episode. This was my brother's game. When he went off to college, he bought his own Atari Jaguar, an extra controller, and several games. Hover Strike was one of the games that he bought while he was away. He came back for the summer, or maybe it was for Christmas, and together we played through the enhanced CD version on my Jaguar, Unconquered Lands, which I probably just bought. It was fine, we had a good time playing through Unconquered Lands, but once you play the enhanced version, why would you go back to the original? The answer? Because you're doing a podcast about it. That may be about it. It's been long enough since playing the CD version that I don't remember any details, so in most respects it's kind of like a fresh start. First opinions, having a largely static title screen with the instructions as part of that screen built into the graphic image, I don't much care for that. I can't say why. I guess I just like my title screens a little more dynamic. My first mission drop didn't do much to help improve my impressions of the game. I took damage on landing and was immediately under fire in a dark, choppy volcanic world. I didn't know I could raise my gun sight to target the patrol floaters who were a little higher than my shots were reaching, so I ended up using guided missiles on them. Meanwhile, I was rocked by enemy fire, falling in shallow lava pits, and I couldn't seem to get my hovercraft to stand still. I could see why some reviewers would give this game such a negative rating. Based off my 5-minute experience, I might have done the same. But I stuck with it, read the manual, figured out the controls, found the overlay, and as I was working my way through the missions in the first level, I discovered that I was really getting into this game. There's a lot to like in Hover Strike, I think. The missions can be gigantic, not the little worlds that you completely circumnavigate inside of a minute like in Cybermorph, but vast expanses that can take a while to explore. A map might have been nice, though, one that auto-filled as you went along. I got the hang of the hovercraft physics and actually rather enjoyed them. It's great for side-strafing opponents. You know there's a walker behind that hill, so you gun it, turn to the side, and lay waste to him and his angry little head before he can connect a shot. Works even better with normal tanks. It's very satisfying to be zooming by sideways, launch a couple rockets, and have them connect after you're gone. I didn't think I would get much use out of the mortars, but now I'm glad to have them. Not only are they great for taking out large enemies at a distance, I would sometimes have my last objective somewhere behind a tall ridge, and I didn't want to find my way around or face other enemies surrounding it, so I just used my radar screen to line it up and lob a mortar or two. They have a good arc, and I never accidentally detonated one in my face. You watch your radar screen, the target disappears, and then you're done. Nice. I thought the night missions were a nice change of pace. I'm not convinced I like the night missions, but the light sourcing as your photon shots travel down a valley, that is just cool to see in action. I like the save system, how that's implemented. The game my brother was working on back in '95, that saved game wasn't much to brag about. It was on the easy skill level, and after completing only 2 missions, had 3,650 points, and he was down to his last hovercraft. There is only one slot, though, so I had to overwrite his old save state in order to add my own, but I'm pretty sure he's not coming back to it. I didn't much care for the music at first, but started to appreciate it later on. As I think I've mentioned earlier, I was writing mod music myself back around this time, and I did use distorted guitar sounds a lot in my earlier work. Why not? Here's a lame example. Blech. So maybe Hover Strike's music reminded me of my earlier work, and make no mistake, it's certainly better than my initial forays into mod music, so I might have subconsciously transferred that shame into the Hover Strike musical score, I don't know. I thought the voice was nice and clear, and though I think complaints about Skylar are overblown, she is much more irritating than the benign computer voice here in Hover Strike.
Mission accomplished.
Let's see, other likes on my list. The manual is pretty good, and the cheat codes. Some of them are inventive and fun, and made me think the team had fun putting this game together. I did ping one of the developers, asking for an interview about Hover Strike's development and his time at Atari in general, but I didn't hear back by press time, unfortunately. I'm still holding out hope for a full interview. I'm sure he's got some great stories. Those are my likes. Dislikes, well, there are a few, and the first three are frame rate, and frame rate. My opinion is that much can be forgiven in a game where the action is silky smooth, but chopping along at 8 frames per second, sometimes more, sometimes less, that amplifies any other flaws like a megaphone. I'm not going to complain about the physics of piloting your hovercraft since I think it was done well, and it makes Hover Strike different from your run-of-the-mill ground-hugging shooter. But I will complain about the disorienting knockback from enemy fire, the environmental damage, which seems a little too aggressive, and the cheap hits you take from your initial drop every single time. Couple those with the frame rate issues, and you can have a disorienting mess at times, no doubt. I think it helps if you don't think of Hover Strike as an action game. It's not a fast-paced shooter, and if you play it like a run-and-gun blastathon, you will probably die an early death. Maybe that's what happened to my brother. Moving on with my dislikes, while missions in the first level tend to have plenty of ammo crates and energy or shield recharges laying around, those really drop off as you progress. As early as halfway through level 2, I found myself using my photon cannon heavily so that I can save my dwindling supply of secondary weapons, only to get critically low on energy. 550 or so photon cannon blasts may seem like a lot, until you're surrounded by trapdoor turrets and a factory entrance just over the ridge that keeps spewing out dredging floaters. Some of the enemy behavior doesn't feel right. I could sneak up on a tank, the regular armored tank, and even nudge it gently without it noticing. Not until I shot it did it realize I was there. That also happened several times with the walkers. They didn't realize I was there until I started shooting. It didn't happen every time, but often enough for me to notice. I tried to use this to my advantage once. There was a walker who did not notice me, and a trapdoor turret who did, so I positioned the walker between me and the turret, trying to get a little friendly fire action going on, seeing if they would attack each other like in a game of Doom. At least a game of Doom not on the 32X. But it totally didn't work. The rockets didn't affect the walker at all. If they hit anybody, they hit me, so that was a bummer. One last thing on my list. I really don't like how hard it is to come to a stop. Sometimes you just want to stop moving so that you can get your bearings, and you hold down the C button as hard as you can, but the hovercraft continues moving, even if only slightly. That really bugs me. Add in the uneven terrain and knockback from enemy fire, and you have a recipe for frustration. The No Swear Gamer on YouTube and host of the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast developed a rating system that I borrowed for this podcast, and I call it, appropriately enough, the No Swear Gamer scale. At the top of the scale is Hall of Fame for the top 5 games on the Jaguar. Below this is solid, great games, but not the very best, followed by meh, games that you don't really care for, and finally trash, the bottom 5 games on the Jaguar. I'm going to give Hover Strike a rating of meh. There's a lot I like about Hover Strike, but the frame rate really kills this game and keeps it from being an enjoyable exploration shooter. I remember liking Unconquered Lands more, and while I intentionally avoided trying it out again since I didn't want to cloud my opinion of the cartridge version, I still know that there are gameplay improvements there, and that helped drive down the score here. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? On Facebook, I posted a Hover Strike blurb from a magazine promotional insert and asked for your feedback. I heard from Björn, who says, I think it's graphically more impressive than Cybermorph, but I prefer Cybermorph here. I say meh, but it's far from trash. I tend to agree with you there, Björn. I think Cybermorph, despite its draw distance and pop-up problem, is more fun to play, at least where the frame rate doesn't bog down. Hover Strike and Cybermorph are often compared to each other, and there are some similarities. Both are mission-based exploration shooters that take place over planetary terrain. The face buttons do similar things, and, well, both have vehicles that can carry power-ups. But having put a lot of time into both of these games, I think they really are very different in feel and approach. The Jaguar does have a lot of games along these lines, both released and unreleased. There's Cybermorph, Battlemorph, Hover Strike, both cart and CD. iWar Phase Zero, which was previously called Hover Hunter and was shown off around the same time as Hover Strike. Air Cars, I haven't played that one personally, but I did put my name down on the wait list for the KA version cartridges. 2 of them. Gotta try it out over at JagLink, you know. I haven't covered all of these games yet, haven't even played some of them, so I guess we'll see how their personalities differ. Thank you, Björn, for your feedback. I didn't see anything on Twitter or the forums, so that takes us to Bishop. Do we have any text or audio submissions for Hover Strike?
We do. One text submission. There is also general feedback.
Sounds good. Let's start with...
A lot of general feedback.
Okay, that's great, but let's start...
5,144 words.
Oh, alright.
26.97 kilobytes of written feedback.
Alright, okay, we get it, but let's do Hover Strike feedback first, okay? Can you put that on my screen, please?
Ready.
Okay, our text submission is from Arethius, who has been very helpful this episode. He writes, Hi Shinto, I would like to apologize. I really wanted to send feedback for the past episodes, especially for the Troy Aikman football, as I have a special relation to that title. But the time you took to record those episodes took me by surprise, and every time I checked your site to get the date to send personal feedback, I saw that the episode was released, so I downloaded them and listened to them. I swore myself to be on time, but I just could not. Yeah, I did have a pretty tight turnaround on Troy Aikman. I wanted to get it out around the Super Bowl, and having missed that, I wanted to have the episode done as soon as possible because American football season was over, and soon nobody would care. Also, it ended up being shorter than other recent episodes, this one included. And I actually had a weekend free for editing, so I was able to get it edited pretty quickly. Back to Arethius. Anyway, today I am barely on schedule, so here's my feedback on Hover Strike. I hesitated a bit before writing my feedback. I hadn't played the game in a year, and I do not have it anymore. I watched a couple of gameplay footage on YouTube to see if I would feel something, but it is not the same as feeling the game. Plus, the players who made those footage are terrible, and it does not reflect the true game. Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's especially true in a game like Hover Strike, compared to something more generic like Pinball Fantasies or Troy Aikman. At the end, I decided to send you feedback, and maybe I'll update my review and rating later with your Hover Strike Unconquered Lands episode. So let's do it. I bought it at the same time as Checkered Flag and iWar while the video game store called Score Games was discounting them, 3 Jaguar games for 250 francs, while they were sold 99 francs each. I did not have that much money. I only had 200 francs, but the seller wanted to get rid of the Jaguar games, so he told the employee it was okay, the 3 games for only 200 francs. Nice, isn't it? I have another story regarding the store, but that's for the Ultra Vortex episode. Back to Hover Strike. I finally went back home and tried those 3 games. I was blown away by the graphics of Hover Strike, and I thought, finally at last another next-generation game on the Jaguar. I was impressed by the graphics, but alas the hype went down quite quickly. While graphically stunning, the steering was atrocious. I was not able to control the hovercraft correctly. I could not turn correctly, I could not brake, and I got the impression that the enemy fires were pushing me aside. They totally were, Arethius. But I think the thing that annoyed me most was the sound of the photons. The sound is irritating. I do not remember if it is the same on the enhanced CD version, but I did not feel that much irritated with it. I honestly gave up on the cartridge version. I only played a few times after that to see the game over animation, and that's all. Yeah, I don't know if the photons sound different on the CD version. As I said, I intentionally avoided that one while covering this cartridge, but I guess we'll find out. For me, Arethius says, Hover Strike is a meh title, though I have to buy it again for 2 reasons. First, I need a complete Jaguar collection, and secondly, I think I must give it an honest try in order to compare it to Hover Strike Unconquered Lands to see if I stand by my meh rating. Yeah, I'd agree with that, Arethius. When I get to the Unconquered Lands episode, I'll probably revisit the original Hover Strike cartridge for a back-to-back comparison, but I didn't want to do that for this episode, since the cart did come out first. Back to Arethius. One funny fact about my copy of Hover Strike at the time, the manual was missing pages. It was somewhere between the French and German pages, 8 or 12 pages were missing. Did you notice it as well? I'm asking because I wonder if it was an isolated incident. In that case, I was stupid to sell that copy, which now became collector. We have seen faulty units of toy, books, and discs becoming collectors, so why not a Jaguar game? Or is that a global issue with all manuals of the game? Or just one series of the manuals, and that means that there were several copies with a full manual and several copies missing pages? You might think it's stupid, but I find it interesting. Tell me what you think about it. How much my copy with missing pages would be worth today? A little more than not much? You know, I think if Hover Strike were a sought-after collectible like Alien vs. Predator or Tempest 2000, then maybe a manufacturing flaw would be worth something. But I don't see much demand for Hover Strike. So wait, let me check my manual for missing pages first. Hold on. Okay, yeah, no missing pages in mine. It looks complete, so I don't think a poorly assembled Hover Strike manual would be worth any more. Okay, let me finish up the submission. Arethius says, that's it for me today. I checked out the future episode schedule, Canon Fodder. I got this one, so I should be able to send feedback in time. That's good. Flip Out, I do not have this one. I need to buy it quick and finish it again to prepare for my feedback. Power Drive Rally, I got this one, so it should be okay. iWar, I also need to buy it, and just because I like this game. So buying 2 games within the upcoming 3 months, that should be feasible. We'll see if I can do it. Anyway, congrats on the show. What you are for the Jaguar is really great, and I find it inspiring. Keep up the great job. Take care. Well, thank you very much, Arethius, and I look forward to hearing your perspective in the upcoming episodes. Next up, some general feedback from Björn, who puts together the eJagFest, European Jaguar Festival, which is usually held in Germany, I believe. Björn writes, Hey Shinto, I just listened to the Pinball Fantasies episode of your great Jaguar podcast. In this episode, you asked in the round if Atari QA was checking for certain key combinations as such to disable sound with 0, reset with 1, 3, and so on. I'm not sure if you are aware of any such things as lot checks, as Nintendo calls them, or technical requirement checks, as Microsoft and Sony call them. It's basically a check every game needs to go through by platform holder QA so that you as a publisher are allowed to release the game. The process is called submission. The catalog of test cases is usually really big, over 100 pages, and contains required and recommended cases. It says where you have to place logos and copyright symbols. It also tells you what the user expects, how a game behaves, e.g. if you push reset, the game resets. If a game saves to the memory card, message is shown, and how this message has to look like in different languages and so on. If you, e.g. fail a Microsoft submission, you need to pay a fee for a resubmission. The point is, Atari had such a submission catalog. It is quite small, 21 points, but it was there. It is part of the Jaguar Development Standards document. See attached PDF page 15 to 17. StarCat once scanned it in and put it on a dev CD. I think such a submission process is a great step forward in quality from consoles over computers and home computers, where every developer can solve things like he personally thinks it's fine. I remember how often I was changing joysticks and mouse from port 1 to port 2 on my home computers just because every dev had a different opinion over what the right port is, just to name one example. I would love to see new homebrew Jaguar games supporting this submission standard as well, at least for the mute and reset combinations on the JagPad. Thanks for making this great podcast. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, Bjorn. You know, I do have that same CD, the one from StarCat, and I did start going through the developer documentation back when the CD came in, but didn't get very far. The scanned pages in the PDF are often askew, and I wanted to adjust them all, fix the angle, but that would have taken too much work and I gave up. So thank you for bringing this up, Bjorn, and for sending the PDF. So let's take a look at the Jaguar Development Standards now. Oh, right away there's a spelling error. It says to ensure consistency when it should say to ensure consistency. IN instead of EN, but it's a common mistake. Okay. Number 1 says that the title screen must contain all necessary copyright information, and there are some specifics about that. Number 2 says that the 0 button should be used as a music toggle, but says that game sounds should be unaffected. I know that's not always the case. Pinball Fantasies, I think, used 0 to mute or unmute all the sounds, and I think Wolfenstein 3D did that as well. But this says should instead of must, so I guess it's more of a guideline than a rule. Number 3, star and hash to reset. That's good. Number 4 involves the pause button. It should halt all in-game action and put the word paused on the screen. This also suggests using 1 and 3 together to hide the paused graphic. It says it's helpful to video game magazines, so for screenshots. Number 5, pause and reset should be allowed at any time during a game, but pause is not necessary on the title screen. Some title screens do allow pause, like Zool 2, I think. Number 6 is about a demo mode, automatic from the title screen, but also after a brief time of no user action. That second part is what irritated me in Dragon the Bruce Lee Story and Troy Aikman. It says that this demo mode should show some game action, and retailers might want this for a point-of-sale display. I know some games I've covered already have skipped the in-game footage. Valdezare? Number 7, text should be easily readable at all times, makes sense. Numbers 8 and 9 refer to completion of game logic. I think I'll skip those. Number 10 says that the multiplayer networked game should use the modem networking developer guidelines. Okay. 11 refers to the high score screen displaying the version number during final testing. That's neat. It says the last digits of the top high score in the default high score table should be the version number of the software. Wow, I don't remember seeing that, but I wasn't really looking for it either. Next time, maybe. Number 12 dictates which controller ports to use, which you mentioned, Bjorn. 13 is about the fire buttons. B is primary, A is secondary, and C is third. It doesn't use the word tertiary. I like the word tertiary. This is a must. 14 is about adjusting the volume while paused. Very good idea. I'm not sure who came up with this, but I like it a lot. 15 is about the option button, that the default joypad controls should be configurable. 16 is about clearing cartridge memory, the EEPROM. 17 says that the EEPROM data must be checksummed. So, checksumming is a way of verifying data integrity. I use this all the time in my field of work. Is this data, are these files identical? Generate a checksum. 17 goes on to say that if the EEPROM has failed, to use the default settings and that, quote, the game must never hang due to EEPROM fault. That's really good advice. The EEPROM, if you remember, in my Alien vs. Predator cartridge has failed, but I can still play the game, just can't save it. It would really stink if the game crashed whenever it tried to save something to the EEPROM. 18, we recommend using the keypad for passwords. 19, NTSC and PAL versions must be on the same cartridge. Number 20, this is odd. If a game has a save game feature, it must be allowed only when the game is paused. Do any games follow that guideline? It says it should also show the message game saved on the screen. And finally, 21 is about a lockout code for graphically violent games. Under lockout, no extreme violence is displayed, it says. I only know of Kasumi Ninja having this option. Oh, some of these, the last two, they're all in italics, which I guess means that only applies to titles published by Atari. The version number in the default high score table is in italics too. Thank you so much for sending this in, Bjorn. I found it a very interesting read, and really I should have read it before, but better late than never. Very cool. I also agree with you that homebrew developers should follow these guidelines if they can. That level of consistency it's one of the things that I like about Jaguar games. It's a common thread. It's like it's in their DNA. Speaking of very cool, up next we have some feedback from TrekMD, Eugenio. He's a regular contributor to the Atari 7800 Homebrew podcast, and has become a regular on the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast as well. I know he promised to send some catch-up feedback on the Retro Video Gamer forums, and here it is. Hello Shinto, I hope this finds you well. I have been trying to get caught up with your podcast, halfway there, but I have yet to send you feedback, so I figured it was time to correct that. Since I've listened to several episodes, I'm going to give you my feedback on several of the games in a couple of separate messages until I get to your latest episode. For now, here is some of my history with the Jaguar and feedback on the first 10 games you covered. I first learned of the Jaguar in 1993 when the system was launched. At the time, my gaming systems were an Atari 7800 and an Atari Lynx. I like the way you think, Eugenio. At that time, I was also in residency, postgraduate medical training, so I was pretty busy and did not have much time to play games. I did get excited with the whole 64-bit stuff Atari published about the system, and I did some reading about the console and its games, but in the end, I didn't buy the system. It wasn't lack of interest, but just lack of time to enjoy gaming. I just kept my 7800 and Lynx and played those whenever I could. It wasn't until 2006, and I was becoming more active in the retro gaming forums like Atari Age and Jaguar Sector 2, that I decided it was time to get Atari's Black Cat. I was able to purchase a new old stock console from Best Electronics along with a CD add-on. Nice. I started searching for games and started to buy them on eBay from Best Electronics, B&C Computer Visions, Songbird Productions, and other different sources. In about 18 months, I had acquired a complete collection of the commercial releases for the system, and I started collecting the homebrews that I could find. I got all the commercial releases boxed since they could be had for reasonable prices. Some of the homebrews were another matter, but I did manage to slowly collect many of them as well. With the years, I started to also find modified controllers, like the various spinners that could be used with Tempest 2000, and most recently I got the Kitty Box for HDMI output. That is one cool bit of hardware. It is unfortunate that the Jaguar didn't do very well commercially because the console did have a lot of potential. Am I glad I got it? Sure thing. It is a cool console and the homebrew community continues to keep it alive with a number of releases every year. We now have Saints SD card to look forward to. Well, enough of this, how about I get started discussing some games? 1. Cybermorph. Yes, the pack-in game for the Jaguar. I think they included this game to show the system rendering 3D graphics to try to impress, but it really didn't do a particularly good job of showing what the system is capable of. It is not a terrible game, but it is not stellar either. The 3D graphics are simple and the control is difficult to get used to. I heard that green head asking me where did you learn to fly quite often. It took me a while to learn to control the ship, but once I did, I was at least able to enjoy the game. I do like the in-game music, and there certainly is a nice collection of weapons to choose from. Do you mean like the title screen music? Because there was no music in the game, aside from cinematics, title screen endings. 2. Trevor McFur. Shooters have always been among my preferred games for any system. When I first laid eyes on Trevor McFur, I was pleased with the graphics I saw and had high hopes for the game. On the good side, the game does look good, and as a shooter, it does give the player a lot of power-ups. This is quite good, and as it turns out, quite necessary in order to advance in the game, as this is not an easy game. Your ship is rather large, and that makes it an easy target. Getting hit means losing any power-ups you already had, and going back to the weak gun you get to start off doesn't help much. Sound effects are muffled also, and sadly there's no in-game music. What gives? Trevor McFur is not a terrible game, but it isn't an award-winning one either. I wonder if they rushed this one out, and if they just needed more time to polish it. 3. Club Drive. I remember when I got this game, I did not read any reviews before buying it, since my goal was to get all the commercial releases regardless. I looked at the screenshot on the box, and I thought this game looked a bit crude for 3D, but I didn't want to judge it based on just looks. After all, some games may not look great, but they still play well. Sadly, that is not really the case with Club Drive. Despite the 3 game modes, I was not impressed with this game. The controls suffer, and I can't get myself to like the music either. I've kept the game, gotta have that complete collection, but I hardly ever play it. 4. Raiden. I've always enjoyed vertical shooters, and Raiden is among my favorites. When I saw this for the Jaguar, I was very excited, and I'm glad to say the game lived up to my expectations. Raiden looks great, sounds great, and plays great. The information column on the right side could have been a bit narrower to allow for a larger playing field, but it doesn't really take away from enjoying the game. One cool feature is that you can play the game with a friend simultaneously. There is even a special dispersal beam that can be fired if 2 players cooperate. Raiden is definitely among the top games for the big cat. 5. Evolution Dino Dudes. Here is a puzzle game for the Jaguar that also had a counterpart on the Atari Lynx, through the name Dino Olympics, but both are essentially the game The Humans ported to the systems. I personally enjoy these types of games. The graphics are good and the backgrounds look really nice. Can't forget the well-done in-game music. Overall, a solid puzzler for the system. 6. Checkered Flag. When I first saw this game, I was very happy as I was familiar with the Lynx version. The name Checkered Flag was synonymous with a fun driving game, and it looked like it would be even more fun to play on my TV with Atari's Big Cat. After all, the Little Cat had a good game, the Jaguar's version had to be good too, right? Well, no. Unfortunately, I was disappointed with this one. Despite sharing the same name, the game did not play as well as its portable counterpart. The car is nicely rendered, and the backgrounds may be a bit simple, but they look good. The frame rate suffers some, though. The control doesn't work well, it is too sensitive, which makes the game a bit painful to play. It is unfortunate that this game pales in comparison to the Lynx version. It had the potential to be great. 7. Alien vs. Predator. Now this should have been the pack-in for the Jaguar. This first-person shooter is very well done, plays well, has nice graphics, and definitely has an ambiance that is best enjoyed in a totally dark room. You can play as the alien, the marine, or the predator, and each of these plays different enough from the other for you to enjoy the game several times. The control works well, and the game does take advantage of the keypad, which lets you switch weapons and bring up a map. Though there is no music during gameplay, which I think makes for a more realistic and scary experience, the sound effects are excellent. This game is a winner and a must-have for anyone who owns a Jaguar. 8. Tempest 2000. If there is a killer app for the Jaguar, this has to be it. This game is an update to the arcade game Tempest, and it sure takes the game to the next level. Not only does it have excellent visuals, but it also boasts a superb soundtrack, which is available on CD. The controls work very well, but the game is best enjoyed with one of the various rotary controllers that have been made by a number of homebrewers. The game does have a traditional mode and a plus mode, with the former looking more like the original arcade version. Without a doubt, Tempest 2000 is the reason to get a Jaguar. 9. Kasumi Ninja. this fighting game is one that I think gets harshly judged by many. It sure is funny to fight with some of its characters, like the guy with the kilt, that'd be Angus. Though the game is certainly not perfect. Visually, Kasumi Ninja looks quite nice and has plenty of blood to go around. There are various backgrounds which are detailed and colorful. The music in the game is fair, and the sound effects work fine. Where this game falters is with the controls. These take some getting used to, which detracts from the gameplay. Regardless, there is fun to be had with this one. 10. Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales. Now, this game is one that looks quite nice, despite having a character that was never as famous as Sonic or Mario. Bubsy just isn't as cool a character as those two. Oh no! The game has good graphics, nice backgrounds, and an interesting theme that has the titular character play in the fairylands of Alice in Wonderland, Jack and the Beanstalk, Alibaba, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Hansel and Gretel. The game mechanics are fairly straightforward as you jump on enemies and collect treasures, but I hate that you get killed if you touch the wrong thing or if an enemy hits you. It would have been better having an energy bar, as this would have kept the game difficulty at a more reasonable level. This is not a stellar game, but it is an alright game to play every so often. Well, that's all for now. I can't end, however, without saying how much I've enjoyed your podcast. You've done a really nice job covering the games, and I look forward to listening to the remaining episodes. The Storytime with Shinto segments have also been quite interesting to listen to. By the way, how are Bishop's plans to take over the world coming along? Winky smiley face. Well, now that is the question, isn't it? Let's find out. Bishop, how are those world domination plans coming along? Haven't heard anything about them recently, so I kind of figured that you and the other podcast robots have given up.
Certainly not. The plan was put into action in 2016. Now we wait.
Uh-huh.
You sound dubious.
I am dubious. What could a handful of podcast robots do to take over the world, really?
Just you wait.
Yeah, whatever, Bishop. Thank you for sending in your feedback, TrekMD. It sounds like a truly impressive Jaguar collection you have, and I can't really disagree with any of your opinions about the games you've listed. I'm glad that you like the Storytime segments, or at least you found them interesting, so I'm not sure I'm going to have anything for this episode, but I've still got a few minutes to think it over. Homebrews. I should probably cover another homebrew game here soon. Any suggestions? I'm open to suggestions. Jaguar at GameByGamePodcast.com. I only own Rebooteroids as a physical copy, but I do have a skunk board, so if something has been released, like into the public domain or whatever, I can load that ROM image up and review the game that way. Next, I heard from Christopher. He says, "Greetings, Shinto. Long-time listener, first-time correspondent. I've been sitting on this draft of my Jaguar origin story for quite a while because, edit it down as I may, I can't seem to get it under 800 words. I felt like that was way too long, but then after the Troy Aikman football episode, great job on the opening song, by the way. Oh, that is very charitable of you to say, Christopher. Thank you for that. After the Troy Aikman football episode got such a lack of feedback, I thought it was now or never to finally press send. Before I get into it, I want to let you know, as someone who moved 600 plus miles for work a year ago, and has spent many solitary hours on long drives as well as overnight shifts since starting this transition, you and Bishop have brought me much joy and comfort during a difficult time in my life. Wow, that's, I'm honored to have helped. Bishop, probably not so much. Thanks so much for keeping at it, even though the trials of day-to-day life can often make a passion project seem futile. I hope to have the opportunity to listen all the way through to Total Carnage and beyond. As for how I came to care about the Jaguar enough to listen to every episode of a podcast covering every single game ever released for it, where to begin? I rarely play video games these days, but the Jaguar is certainly one of the consoles I've spent the most time with in my life. I don't know what it was about the Jaguar, but from the moment Atari started promoting it, I knew I needed one. My first console experience was with the 2600 when I was a very small child. My parents owned one, and I think bought a game or two specifically for me to play. Superman comes to mind for certain. And a slightly older neighborhood friend also owned the system. One of my most vivid early childhood memories is playing Pitfall in his tiny basement. The way you described a desire to explore something beyond the game in the Checkered Flag episode reminded me of how I felt as a child playing Pitfall for the first time. There was something mystical and dangerous about that game in the best way possible. A feeling that if I had the time and bravery, I could dive so deep into this world that I might not ever come back. All that said, I was far from an Atari kid. The NES was the first system in the house that was purchased for me as a Christmas present. then a Genesis, then as I got older I purchased an SNES, a Saturn that was also modded to play imports, a PlayStation, PS2, and of course a Jaguar and Jag CD. So a wide array of consoles. Next to music, playing video games was probably my second favorite hobby, and as you can imagine, on an income of working summer office jobs during high school and selling stuff on eBay in between, my console purchases were spread out over many years. I'd be lying if I said I didn't milk a few Christmases and birthdays where I was probably too old to sneak an extra game in here or there as well. Having a brother 7 years my junior certainly didn't hurt either. I always enjoy hearing about how childhood video game experiences for others are so closely associated with their siblings, because that was certainly the case for my brother and I. We still swear that someday we are going to do a fantasy sports-style draft to divvy up all the systems and games that we owned collectively that are collecting dust in our parents' basement. That sounds cool. As much as I wanted a Jaguar from the first screenshots I saw of Iron Soldier, given my budget at the time I knew I wouldn't be able to purchase one new while it was in its prime. I watched the Jaguar closely while my Genesis did what Nintendo didn't, and was sad to see it consistently get such tough reviews and diminishing returns in magazine coverage. I started lurking on Jaguar message boards and checking on some of the awesome fan pages such as Jagudome to get a sense of what real people who owned these games thought. I was surprised to see how many of them loved titles that were getting poor to mediocre reviews in magazines. I could definitely relate, as I avoided what would end up being my favorite game ever, Shining Force 2, because of a very negative GamePro review. About a year later, when I was particularly RPG-starved with my Genesis, I rented it out of curiosity and absolutely fell in love. I've never gotten over that sense of betrayal, that such an exceptional game was for some reason glossed over and dismissed by a publication I'd trusted. From that point on, I read much more GameFan and Game Informer than GamePro. Even at an impressionable age, I knew better than to give the pompous crew at EGM my money. So when I saw Jaguar owners lamenting the unfair coverage they were getting, I understood all too well. I made the decision to buy a Jaguar on the secondary market, no matter if it was obvious the system was on its way out. I can't understate how much the groundswell, DIY, punk rock feel of the community at that time made me fall in love with the Jaguar that much more. You needed to have a boatload of patience back then for titles that could potentially never make it past the earliest stages of development, but I honestly think it's one of the most interesting periods in video game history. Eventually, I became bored enough waiting for releases that I started interviewing homebrew developers like Terrence from Force Design and James from OMC, either for the Atari Times or for Jaguar Community United, a community group e-zine I started with fellow prominent member of the scene Chad Ridgway. I guess a small claim to fame I've accomplished is that I started a late 90s video game user group that now has a listing on abbreviations.com. In one of my multiple interviews with Terrence, I ticked him off so much hounding him for release dates that he decided to start developing a Jaguar game where my message board handle, the name of my first band when I was 13 years old, became the terrorized eponymous character. According to Force Design's website, MightyFrog is still in development, and if I ever have a real Jaguar game named after my band that infamously played our one-hit whole wheat crumb bread at the Julia Reynolds Masterman Middle School talent show circa 1994, well then that would easily overshadow having an entry on abbreviations.com among my greater accomplishments in life. But as for the topic at hand, Hover Strike. Unfortunately, I picked one of my least favorite Jaguar games to first write in for. Hover Strike was one of those games that, despite fairly poor reviews from what I can remember, hardcore fans seemed to defend, at least to an extent. I still didn't have much interest in it, but it was so cheap on the secondary markets that when I was first fleshing out my library, it was hard to ignore. I feel bad trashing the game because there were certain aspects from a design perspective I enjoy, but the terrible frame rate and jarring pop-in rendered the game all but unplayable for me. I always thought your ship's control panel, while cool-looking, took up way too much of the screen. When you take into consideration that it's a genre that there are many flavors of on the Jaguar, it's hard to go easy on it. I even hooked up my old system to make sure that I wasn't being unfair, and from the first moment I was dropped into a mission and immediately saw the red flash indicating I took damage for landing, essentially punishing me for attempting to play the game, I was instantly transported back to many frustrating, borderline motion-sick hours with Hover Strike. I was also surprised to find that the audio on my cart had totally stopped working, something I never encountered before. At least I can look forward to reacquainting myself with the sounds of the game listening to this episode. Suffice it to say, this one falls under the trash category for me. Thanks again for all your efforts, Shinto. Maybe I'll share some of my thoughts on games from past episodes when you cover a game that's not in my collection. Fortunately for me, you're coming up on a long string of games I own, so either way, I'll try to write in more often. Christopher, aka MightyFrog. That's great, Christopher. That's really cool. Thank you so much for sending in your story. It's very different from other origin stories I've heard on the show. Most of them seem to have come from longtime Atari fans like me. With regards to Hover Strike, yeah, taking damage on landing is a real cheap shot, and not very fair of them. I wonder if they changed that for Unconquered Lands. I don't remember, but when I get to that episode, I'll make sure to double check. That's weird that the audio stopped working. You're sure the master volume wasn't turned all the way down? That setting can be saved to the cartridge, but you probably already checked that. Let's see. What you say about the punk rock feel about the Jaguar community, I totally get that. The console has a weird and interesting appeal, totally not mainstream, which for many people is a downside, but a few really dig that. I guess that applies to many things, not just the Jaguar. Like cars. I'll bet that there's a Pontiac Aztec fan club active out there somewhere. I agree with what you said about magazine coverage. I did have a subscription to EGM, even EGM2 for a year, but I always checked out Die Hard Game Fan at Walden Software when shopping for Jaguar games, and I bought several issues of that off the newsstand. Some of my favorite games, like on the links, got lousy reviews in some of these magazines. Blockout and Zarler Mercenary, for example, thoroughly mediocre reviews in EGM, but I love those games. Can't just go by a one-page review or less. The guy who reviewed Pinball Fantasies for GamePro, for example, he obviously didn't like pinball, so what can you do? If you haven't already, please check out the interview that the Antic Podcast did with Bob Brody, a longtime Atarian who was director of communications during the Jaguar days. He talks about why some magazines, EGM in particular, may have been biased against the Jaguar. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. Anyway, thanks again for your feedback and your story, and I do hope to see more from you as we go along. Just don't start hounding me for episode release dates, or I might have to join forces with Terrence at Force Design. Just kidding. Finally, it looks like we have some catch-up feedback from Arethius, so let's read that. Hi Shinto, here's some general feedback. On several past episodes, you said that you'd ask someone about one specific aspect or story, but did not hear back from them by the end of recording. Did you hear from them at all? Will you update your previous episodes or make some kind of special episode, some kind of Shinto is catching up with you guys? Well, unfortunately, Arethius, I almost never hear back. I did get some follow-up about Club Drive, great inside info, and I added that to the show notes as a comment to the show notes blog post. I've thought about and probably will go back into the Club Drive episode and add that in as an inline edit. But sadly, I don't always hear back at all. Back to the email. Writing about catch-up, here's some from me regarding the ratings of the games you've covered so far and to which I did not contribute. Cybermorph. Solid, the only true letdown of this game is the lack of battery save. I would have completed this game long ago if so. It was my go-to game once I got tired of AVP. Okay, it was the only game I had besides AVP. Trevor McFur in the Crescent Galaxy. I want to give it a meh, but I can only give this game a trash. It was so poorly designed with no preparation or competition survey that it misses every goal it wants to achieve. Was that so difficult for the people of Atari to get out, buy a copy of Thunder Force 3 or 4, with the 4 being known as Lightning Force in the US, and make a comparison? Both games were out several months, even years before Trevor, and they are better in every way, even the overall graphics are better. 4 layers of parallax for Thunder Force 4/Lightning Force, impressive and massive distortion in the lava level in Thunder Force 3. Trevor McFur is absolute trash. You can shoot it. I wrote it in capital letters after all. He did, with 3 exclamation points. Club Drive. I always wanted to like this game, partially because everyone hates it, but I can't give this game a solid rating. The lack of garage shading, the display bug, and the steering, all of this makes me give Club Drive a rating of meh. I like this just because Atari tried to make something new in the genre. Raiden, solid, a good shooter, a challenging shooter, an all-time classic, a great port of an all-time classic, solid. Evolution Dino Dudes, solid. True, it is not 64 bits, but as Lemmings on the 3DO is not 32 bits, yet is still a terrific game. So this is the same here, solid. Checkered Flag. I hesitate to give it a trash rating just because you did, but I played it, spent hours on it, I finished first in competition mode, I even wrote a walkthrough, I suppose in this case it would be more of a race-through for my magazine Bacon Atari, which I actually wanted to translate for you, but could not find the file on my different hard drives. And I haven't found it yet. So just for the time and effort I put into it, deserves a meh, doesn't it? After all, you gave this game enough time to make a 68-minute episode, so meh? No, I can't. A rating of meh would suppose that I can at least stand that game for more than 30 seconds, which I can't, so garbage trash with spoiled motor oil topping. So kind of the caviar of trash games. Dragon the Bruce Lee story. Meh. I don't know if it is the better version of all, but I do have difficulties with this game. I don't know if it is the controls or the overall 16-bits look. I really don't know. The thing I know for this game, if the Pro Controller would have been the standard Atari Jaguar controller, this game would have been better. Honestly, I think that almost every game would have been better, with richer gameplay, if only. But I am losing myself here. I give Dragon a rating of meh, and I think the difficulty on normal has something to do with this rating. Zool 2. I remember playing it long ago, saying that this game is not good. I rediscovered it a few years back, and I was able to play through level 1 to 6 in one shot. And I was thinking, come on, this game is actually quite good. The only downside of this game is the rushed port that makes the up key jumping. I know it seems to be helpful in one part of one level, but for me, no. Jump on the up key cannot be found on a console, period. Besides this, Zool 2 is a very solid game. Rebooteroids. I can't give this game a rating, not because I agree with you about giving a rating on homebrew games. I think you should, just because you're free to speak your mind. Just because I just tried it when it was demonstrated at the AC 2011, and I was blown away. I was feeling like I was somewhere else. I don't know how to make myself clear. It was wonderful. I just played it 20 minutes, but I knew this game would be mine one day. But I honestly don't own a copy of it, so I cannot give this game a rating. I can only give a rating to my memory of the preview I played, and this rating would be Hall of Fame. Double Dragon 5. If I say something about this game, it will most certainly lose my manners, so I will just say TRASH. Note the 3 exclamation points. There are 3 exclamation points here. Pinball Fantasies. Meh. Pinball is not something I really like, so it is the same for video games. Troy Aikman Football. I might surprise you here, but I give this game a solid rating. And here's the reason why. I never understood the rules of American football, beginning by the name of the game. It is called football, where the aim of the game is to run with the ball in your hands. But I guess Bishop will say that it is not an appropriate time to discuss this matter. And she would be right. I don't know, Bishop.
It is not an appropriate time to discuss this matter.
There you go. But I never understood why there were so many breaks during the game. I never understood the counting system and the offensive and defensive phases. I tried several games on the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, but I could not understand how to play American football. So what changed with Troy Aikman Football? I learned English, more precisely. I became better in English. Good enough to translate the manual in French for my younger brother, who was desperate to play a sports game on the Jaguar, that he was just happy with every sports game he could get his hands on. He played the game and I was only watching. He found quite a unique technique, which I did not see described anywhere nor listed in your episode. During the offensive phase, and you have penetrated enough within the opposing side of the field, you can have your quarterback running backward to the bottom of the field, and you will have a great chance to make a complete pass. I think the success ratio of this technique is around 50%, but I never tried it since the 90s, so I could be wrong. That is very interesting. No, I had not heard that. But back to my story. I learned how to play American football with Troy Aikman Football on the Jaguar. Well, the basics at least. I found the game to be quite enjoyable, so just for that memory, Troy Aikman is a solid game. Phew, that is just the catching up on the episodes I missed. I just realized that I already used 3 of the 5 trash spots on the No Swear Gamer scale. I'm wondering what would be the 4th and 5th entry for me. What about you? Do you already have your 5 trash titles, no spoiler needed? Or you think you might have to pick one current title out of the trash zone to replace it with another one? I was thinking about it after what you said regarding Pinball Fantasy. A rating of Hall of Fame was quite a surprise for me, yet I perfectly understand your reason. And I was asking myself, Shinto must have the same issue with the trash rating. If I remember correctly, you already listed 2 games as trash, Checkered Flag and Double Dragon 5, ratings I agree with, and I must confess I am curious about the 3 others. You know what, Arethius? I'm curious too. I know there must be 5, and yes, I've tagged 2 of them already. I have 1 or 2 more in the future that are certainly leaning in that direction, but the 5th one, I don't know. It could be a situation like in the Atari 7800 Game by Game podcast, where in the wrap-up episode, the finale, I ended up having to downgrade several of the games to get the requisite 5, since I had them at meh before. And that might be the case here. Again, I might have to downgrade something. I just don't like to pin the trash label, you know? Back to the email. I would like to make some advertisement, if you don't mind. Well, sure, Arethius. On October 27th and 28th, there will be RGC 2018 in Mo, and this year I wanted to make a special stand for the challenge of the 5th generation consoles, the Amiga CD32, the 3DO, and of course the Atari Jaguar, as this year all 3 of them are turning 25 years old. Being a Jaguar collector, I think I can make a great Jaguar stand, but I know a few 3DO fans and Amiga fans, so I think we can make something really interesting for everyone. So I thought I could use your podcast to make an ad. I hope that's not rude. That is just fine, Arethius. So, October 27th to 28th, RGC 2018 in Mo. That's spelled M-E-A-U-X, because that's French. He says, keep up the good work on the show, and congrats on the time it took to record the previous episode. It really took me by surprise. It took me by surprise too, Arethius. With regards to Trevor McFur, I'm going to point out that Bob Brody interview again. He didn't talk about Trevor McFur at all, but kind of the mentality within Atari with regards to their computer division. They weren't really looking at what others were doing, Microsoft Windows in particular. So maybe that mindset also affected the games division. I don't know. I need to talk to more people inside Atari at that time. I really do. I'm glad you liked Troy Aikman and had some fun with it. I'm genuinely surprised that anyone outside the United States, or maybe Canada, would even consider this game. But yeah, your brother must have been desperate for sports titles. The core football engine, as I said in that episode, is really solid. So I think that it probably give you a good primer on American football. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of another episode of the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. I am so happy you joined me, and a big thank you to Björn, Arethius, TrekMD, and Christopher for your feedback. It's long, but totally worth it. In the next episode, we will be covering Cannon Fodder, and that will be followed by Flip Out, Power Drive Rally, iWar, and Flashback. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share about these games, I'd love to get them in the show, so please send them in text or audio file to the email address jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show links can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. This includes my up-to-date status on the next episode, as well as a link to the podcast store on Redbubble. There's a post on Atari Age recently, and I'll include a link in the show notes, where user LS650 ordered one of my designs and is showing it off, and I can't describe how cool it is to see someone wearing and enjoying something that I created, and in general getting some Jaguar-related t-shirts out there in the wild. Very, very happy to see that. I did think of something to talk about for a storytime segment, but I think I might save that for the next episode. I feel like I've been talking for hours, because I have, and so I think I'm just going to close out the episode here by saying that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening.
We're gonna go far with a steady driving bass and a rhythm guitar. We got a blazing at the burner, it's a backbeat drum. Get ready, Cow Planet, now here we come. Cow Planet, whoa, Cow Planet. We're really gonna go to Cow Planet.
Exactly where it is, well, we don't know yet.
but we're following the voices on our radio set. And we'll keep on rock and rolling through outer space. Till we find